Welcome back to Terrified Tales, where the rain falls slow and the fear creeps in quicker. Like and subscribe before we begin, and tell us where and when you're listening. Midnight, alone, that's when they find you. The wind along the Côte d'Azur a bit colder than Camille remembered. It wasn't supposed to be this cold in April. The road to St. Florent Abbey twisted up the white limestone cliffside like a surgical scar. The sea below invisible but ever present in its sound, slow, rhythmic, patient, like breath, patient, like something sleeping. Camille Denard pulled her ministry-issued suitcase over gravel and knotted roots, stopping at the iron gate where two stone angels had wept so long their faces had eroded into blank masks. She paused. The gate didn't creak when she opened it. It exhaled. The abbey was a hunched silhouette of Romanesque austerity, cloisters black with damp, shutters like closed eyes. Her footsteps echoed too soon, as if the stone beneath anticipated her weight. Somewhere deep within, something shifted, like furniture being dragged across the belly of the world. Her quarters were modest: a bed, a table, and a shelf that had once held prayer books but now waited for her archival equipment. She set her suitcase down, unzipped it, and froze. Lying neatly atop her linen folders and wrapped scanner was a cracked baby monitor. White plastic, yellowed by age. The speaker grill had fractured into a smile. She stared at it. Her hand hovered, then pulled back. She hadn't touched this object in years. She hadn't packed it. There had been no reason to. Still, she lifted it from the suitcase as if it were an infant skull, light but unbearably dense in memory. The power light flickered once, then again. "Non," she whispered, as though saying it softly could turn the moment unreal. She wrapped it in a towel and shoved it into the wardrobe's lowest drawer, beneath a blanket she wouldn't use. Then she unpacked the rest. Camera, notepads, a copy of the original floor plans of Saint Florent, and her ministry credentials. The work would cleanse this. Routine would keep the silence in its place. A knock at her door, slow, deliberate. Camille opened it to find a man in monk's robes, gaunt and still as a church statue, Brother Morian. He looked down at her ministry ID, and then at her, his lips pursed like he might speak. But he simply extended a long iron key. It was ancient, the bow shaped like a spiral. Her fingers touched his as she accepted it. Cold. He nodded once and pointed down the cloister hall. "The reliquary vault," she said quietly. "Merci." He did not respond, only turned and faded into shadow. Camille locked her door, more out of instinct than fear, and sat on the bed. She looked once toward the wardrobe. A thin line of static hissed beneath the towel. No batteries were inside it. Outside, the wind stopped. The silence thickened. The morning after her arrival, Camille stepped into the nave with her leather satchel tight against her side, and the key Brother Morian had given her, hanging cold around her neck on a cord. The abbey was older than most still standing in France, but it had none of the grandeur, only silence and stone that seemed to lean inward as if listening. Her boots echoed across the mosaic floor, though some echoes didn't return right. Some came back delayed, distorted. Others didn't come back at all. She found Elise Prieur outside the refectory, her short hair windswept from the walk-up. She was scribbling notes on a clipboard, measuring the wall thickness. "You're late," Elise said without looking up. "I arrived last night," Camille replied. "Met Brother Morian. He gave me the key to the reliquary." Elise looked up, brow raised. "He spoke to you?" Camille hesitated. "No, he didn't have to." Elise smirked. "He hasn't spoken since the restoration failed in '94. They say he took a vow of silence, but I think it's just dementia. Still, he's harmless." Camille didn't respond. Her fingers found the edge of the key in her coat pocket and gripped it. They descended a spiral stair, lit only by Elise's shoulder-mounted torch. The air changed as they went, drier, yet heavy. Like something slept here and didn't like to be disturbed. At the bottom was the vault door, an arched slab of black iron sealed with 3 recessed locks. Above it, carved into the stone lintel, was a series of symbols neither of them could decipher. Camille raised her phone and snapped a photo. Elise tapped the metal with a knuckle. Still cool, never warms, even when the sun's been on it all day. "Who made it?" Camille asked. Elise shrugged. "The church denies it's part of the original structure. Some say it was added after the Black Plague. Others say it was here before the Abbey." Camille inserted the key into the central lock. It resisted, then turned with a shudder. The door groaned open a few inches. A smell like wet cloth and dried blood leaked out. She stepped inside. The reliquary chamber was larger than expected. 20 meters long, domed ceiling lost in shadows, alcoves along the walls with sealed niches and tarnished nameplates. No light source, yet something glowed faintly from within, phosphorescent threads laced into the ceiling stone. She took a slow breath. The silence inside the vault was total, not merely quiet, but consuming. It muffled even her thoughts. Camille's ears strained for noise, any noise. Behind her, Elise muttered, "Feels like a tomb." Camille turned. "It is a tomb. This is where they kept the sacred dead. But where are the bodies?" They moved toward the first alcove, where a sealed reliquary box sat beneath a broken marble plaque. Camille brushed off centuries of dust and leaned in. The name read, "S. Flor Enti Infans." Elise snorted. "That's not Latin, that's gibberish." Camille didn't respond. Her eyes had caught something. Beneath the nameplate, barely visible, was a thumbprint embedded in the stone, small, infant-sized. Then the breathing started, soft, faint. From behind the stone, as if the wall itself sighed, they both froze. "Did you?" Elise began. But Camille had already turned, walking fast, not running. Not yet. Her hand on the cord around her neck, the iron key swinging as she left the vault and climbed back into the cold light of the nave. Behind them, the vault. Door did not close, it watched. That night, Camille stood in the cloister's central courtyard, staring at the abbey's silhouetted tower under a cloud-wrung sky. No stars, no breeze. The world held its breath. She hadn't spoken in hours. In her room, the baby monitor buzzed, faintly beneath the blanket in the wardrobe. She could feel it, not hear it, feel it, like the pressure of a held scream. Elise had gone silent after their descent into the vault. She had walked back to her own lodging, muttering about airflow anomalies and natural stone acoustics. But her eyes had changed, no longer dismissive, but darting, doubting. Camille pressed her fingers against her temples. She hadn't slept, not since the breathing. She made her decision at midnight. Pulling on her coat, she tucked the vault key into her sleeve and descended the spiral stairs alone. The reliquary's door stood ajar. Camille stepped through without lighting her torch. The phosphorescent webbing in the ceiling shimmered faintly, pulsing like veins. She slid the iron shut behind her and turned the lock from the inside. Click. The silence wrapped around her throat like velvet. No wind, no insects. Even her heartbeat felt distant. She unpacked her field scanner and moved from alcove to alcove, cataloguing nameplates and measuring the reliquary boxes. Her breath fogged before her, even though the air was dry. Her fingers ached from the cold, but it grounded her. She wanted the ritual of the work, the naming of things, the quiet. But quiet didn't stay quiet for long. She heard it again, breathing. From the walls, and something else, a scrape, long, slow, like nails dragged across ancient stone. She stood still, turned off the scanner, and listened. The sound repeated, closer now, then stopped. She turned toward the sound and took 3 slow steps. Then, without warning, her recorder flared to life in her pocket. A single word, warped by static, burst from it. Maman. Camille gasped and dropped the recorder. It cracked. Against the floor, voice clipped. Then silence. She knelt, trembling, reaching for it, then paused. Her fingers hovered above the cold stone. There were tracks in the dust, tiny ones, child-sized, barefoot, leading away from the alcove marked S floor NT infans and into a narrow passage she hadn't noticed before, a blind hallway barely, wide enough for one. She should have run, should have screamed. But Camille moved forward, 1 foot at a time, down the narrow corridor, the breathing following, growing softer the deeper she went. She turned a corner and found a cradle, hand-carved, bleached white, rocking slowly, empty, except for a bundle of old linens tied with a string. She reached for it, unwrapped it, and found a key, not iron, bone. As she touched it, the cradle stopped rocking, and behind her, something exhaled, irreversible. The passage behind her had vanished. She was alone in a chamber not marked on any map, with no way back, no sound but her own shallow breath and the soft creak of old wood. Camille awoke on the reliquary floor, her coat dusted in fine white powder, the bone key still clutched in her fist. There had been no passage, no cradle, no bundle, nothing but stone now. She staggered upright, limbs trembling, eyes unfocused. The scanner blinked red on the floor nearby, still recording. She picked it up and rewound. The playback crackled. Then, Maman, why didn't you feed me? The voice was unmistakably childlike, but it wasn't her child's voice. It was hers. She shut it off. Climbing back to the vault's entrance, Camille found the iron door wide open again. Elise stood in the hallway just beyond, jaw tight, eyes bloodshot. She held a small hammer like a weapon. I heard the recorder, Elise said. Through the damn floor. Camille said nothing, just stepped past her into the hallway, breathing, like she'd surfaced from drowning. You locked yourself inside, Elise added, following. You could have suffocated. Camille paused and turned, voice sharp. There was a cradle in the wall, a hidden corridor. It closed behind me. There are no hidden corridors in this foundation. I designed this retrofit myself. The Abbey's a tomb, not a labyrinth. Camille didn't argue. She was already walking away. Back in her room, she locked the door and washed the dust off her face. It clung like pollen, fine and faintly metallic. As she stripped off her coat, something fell to the stone floor with a sharp clink. She bent down, a small tooth, milk white, human, worn at the edges, as if it had been handled often. It hadn't been in her pocket before. Camille stared at it. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. Then, another sound. Tap, tap, tap at her door. She opened it cautiously. No one stood there. Only a sealed wax envelope, aged and brittle, left gently on the floor. Inside was a page from a hymn book folded around something. Camille peeled it open with care and found 3 more child's teeth, wrapped in a lock of her own hair. How it had been cut, when, she didn't know, but it was hers, too fine, too specific, tied with crimson thread. The hymn on the paper was in Latin, but only the first line was legible. Domine, ne taqueris in me. Lord, do not be silent in me. She sat down hard on the bed. Suddenly, the baby monitor, still buried deep in the wardrobe, emitted a shrill click, like something toggled on. Then came a faint gnashing, teeth grinding behind the static. She flung open the wardrobe, pulled the monitor free, and yanked out the batteries, though it wasn't supposed to have any. Inside, empty battery slots. A small folded paper instead. Camille unfolded it with shaking hands, written in crayon, "I won't stay hungry forever." The baby monitor speaker smiled again, that jagged fracture across its grill catching the moonlight. Outside her room, the wind picked up and the cloister bells rang softly, though no rope had been pulled in years. Camille met Elise just after dawn by the cloister well, where morning fog pooled like breath caught in stone lungs. Neither spoke at first. Camille's hair was unbrushed, her eyes ringed with the same shade as the reliquary walls. Elise looked worse, mud on her jeans, blood along the knuckles of her left hand. "I couldn't sleep," Elise muttered. Camille nodded. Something kept walking outside my door. But when I looked, nothing. Elise finished. They didn't need to say more. By silent agreement, they returned to the lower vault, determined to confront what logic refused to define. Elise brought her scanner this time. Infrared, thermal, and magnetic mapping. Camille brought the bone key. At the bottom of the stone stairwell, Elise paused and laid out the blueprints on a small folding table. She flattened them beneath a lantern's light and pointed to the section labeled Repositoire Principal. "This chamber," she said, "has a fixed circumference of 22 meters. Alcoves are symmetrically spaced. No corridors, no cradles, no children." Camille didn't respond. She had already opened the vault door and stepped inside. Today, the chamber felt different. Not colder, but closer. The air hugged the skin, damp with something sour beneath it. The light from the ceiling's thread veins had dimmed. The silence had deepened. Elise followed cautiously, scanning each wall section, mumbling notes. No magnetic anomalies, no secondary voids, solid stone. Camille walked straight to the alcove marked S Floor NT. Infans. She stood before it, still sealed, still etched with the tiny thumbprint. Elise's scanner suddenly beeped. "What?" Camille asked. "There's a heat source behind that wall." They exchanged a glance. Elise reached into her bag and withdrew a small chisel. With quick surgical taps, she began to scrape around the edge of the stone plate. Camille's heart pounded in time with each strike. She wanted it open. She wanted it closed. She didn't know which was worse. With a final crack, the stone loosened. Elise stepped back. Camille leaned forward and pried it free. Behind it was an empty hollow, deep and black, lined with waxy, flesh-colored material. Something like skin, something organic. There was a smell now, copper and sour milk. Camille reached in, hesitated, then pulled out the only item within, a mobile made of bones, delicate like wishbones, hung on twine, still swaying though there was no wind. Each bone was carved with names. Agnès, Mireille, Camille. Elise stepped back sharply. "That's your name." Camille looked up. Her voice was dry as stone. "It wasn't there before. I would have seen it. It wasn't on the plans. A crack echoed through the chamber. Not from the alcove, from the back wall. They turned. The reliquary wall had shifted, grown longer. Another alcove had appeared. Then another and another. "What the hell?" Elise whispered. She held up the scanner, now flashing wildly. Chamber dimensions expanding with no seismic event, no structural trigger. They backed toward the exit, but it wasn't there. The entrance tunnel had moved. Just a wall now. Camille ran to it, pounded. On it felt smooth, ancient stone. Not a seam, not a crack. "We didn't take a wrong turn," Elise said, breath catching. "We didn't. This isn't possible." Camille turned in a slow circle. The chamber had grown, but it had not changed. The alcoves had multiplied, but all of them looked identical. Same dust. Same distance. They had stepped into a room that copied itself while you weren't watching. Behind her, the mobile of bones turned slowly, casting flickering shadows that looked like small children dancing in reverse. "Which way did we come from?" Elise asked, her voice too loud now. "Camille, which one is ours?" Camille didn't answer. because every alcove looked like hers. Everyone had her name, and one of them was rocking. They chose the only direction that felt like forward. Camille and Elise moved down a narrow passage, flanked on either side by the mirrored alcoves that shouldn't exist. Every few meters, the architecture subtly warped. Walls sloped ever so slightly inward, floor stones bore fresh dust, and overhead, the phosphorescent veins had dimmed to a sallow grey, pulsing only when Camille stepped beneath them, as if the stone itself was breathing her presence in. Neither woman spoke. Then a chamber opened around them. Not large, but round, with one single object at its heart, a reliquary pedestal, and atop it, a black marble box no larger than a bread loaf. Cracks spidered along its surface, veins of quartz glinting like teeth. Camille approached first. A thin plaque on the pedestal read, Es flor enti, infans, integra corpora, silencio. Elise, peering over her shoulder, translated aloud, entire body. Silence. Camille touched the lid. The marble was warm. A tremor passed through her fingers, not pain, not heat, rhythm, like the echo of a heartbeat, and then faintly, just below the silence, a lullaby. Low, garbled, hummed without breath. Camille knew that melody. She had sung it once, only once, the night before her miscarriage. She opened the lid. Inside was a skull, infant-sized, porcelain white and polished smooth. But something was wrong, not just age. The jaw was stitched shut, thread pulled through the bone, as if someone had sewn the silence into it. Camille stumbled back. Her mouth opened, but no scream came. Her throat was a locked door. She blinked rapidly, tears forming for reasons she didn't understand. Elise stepped closer, studying the skull with detached horror. These threads, they're waxed. Ritual-grade linen. This isn't preservation. She hesitated. It's containment. The lullaby grew louder. Only Camille heard it now. Not from the box. From the baby monitor in her coat pocket. Still batteryless, she yanked it out. The speaker shimmered, as though something inside were moving. Not sound waves, breath, then a voice, low, gravelly, her own. Why didn't you open the door? Camille dropped it. The lullaby skipped, slowed, and reversed. Sil ook. Ah, she froze. Lucille, the name she had chosen. The one she had whispered in the dark hospital room beneath the hum of machines. The name no one knew. She picked up the monitor and backed away, eyes fixed on the skull. For a brief, impossible second, the thread moved, as if the jaw beneath it clenched. I need air, Camille rasped, stumbling into the hall. Elise followed. They walked in silence, breath fast and shallow. Then something shifted. The corridor they exited into was wrong. The walls here were darker, more organic, damp. Shapes beneath the stone moved with their steps. Not reflections, responses. Camille placed her hand on the wall, then yanked it back. Wet, there were fingerprints forming in the condensation, tiny, dozens of them, pressing outward, one at a time. Then a mouth appeared, formed of mist, steam, and shadow, pressing through the wall like something trapped just behind it. No lips, no eyes, just an orifice, waiting to scream, but no sound came. Camille's knees buckled. She clutched the monitor to her chest. The mouth pulsed, then disappeared. Only wet stone remained. We need to go back, Elise whispered, her voice trembling. Camille shook her head slowly. There is no back, she said, only below. She didn't mean to say it, but something inside her had already known. Camille didn't speak for the rest of the walk. Elise, however, was unraveling in pieces, quiet, then muttering, then suddenly stopping in place as if hearing something Camille couldn't. They emerged from the reliquary into the cloister under an overcast sky. Light filtered through the chapel's narrow stained glass windows like diluted blood. In the refectory, they sat at opposite ends of the long wooden table, separated by distance and unspoken dread. A bowl of untouched bread lay between them, stale from exposure. Camille stared at it. The shape of the loaf reminded her of the stitched skull, smooth, swollen, unnecessary. Elise finally broke the silence. I lied. Camille blinked, looking up. "About the plans," Elise said, her voice ragged. "About this place." Camille's fingers curled against the table. "You didn't just design the retrofit," she said slowly. Elise nodded. "I found Saint Florent when I was still a grad student, doing thesis research on subterranean architecture. The abbey wasn't even on the official registry back then. It was passed down by oral custodianship, never sold, never declared." "Then how did you get access?" "I broke in," Elise said, "with another student, Nicholas Sharon. He never came back up." Camille stiffened. "What do you mean, never came back up?" "He went down. Vault wasn't locked back then. Said he saw someone, heard crying. I waited. Hours passed, then night. I called emergency services, claimed we were tourists who'd gotten separated. No one found him. Not a trace, no footprints, no report." Camille swallowed hard. Elise leaned forward, eyes wide now, unfocused. "They paid me to stay quiet. Church reps, not priests, administrators, offered me a job if I filed a report with errors in the spatial maps. Said they needed the vault sealed but listed as inert, and you agreed." I told myself I didn't believe it. I told myself there was no crying, that maybe Nick ran, that I imagined the singing. Elise paused. "But I heard it again last night." Camille's mouth was dry. "I think it feeds on what we try to forget," Elise whispered. "It survives, on things we won't admit happened." Camille stood abruptly. Elise followed. "What did it show you down there?" Camille didn't answer. She walked to her quarters, opened the wardrobe and pulled out the baby monitor. Still warm, still smiling, she handed it to Elise. Elise held it reluctantly, turning it over. "I tore this apart yesterday," Camille said. "No circuits, no batteries." A long silence, then the monitor crackled, a man's voice. "Camille." Her heart stopped. Elise looked up sharply. "Camille, I can hear you. Why aren't you answering?" Camille reached out and snatched it back. Her fingers trembled. It was Olivier's voice, calm, concerned, alive. The voice of a man she hadn't spoken to in over a year. The man who left when her grief made the air in their apartment too heavy to breathe. Elise stepped back, visibly shaken. "Did you record that?" Camille shook her head. "No, I haven't spoken to him. Not once." "Then why is he in the vault?" They stood in silence. Outside, the wind picked up. Through the high window panes, the cypress trees bent low, too low, toward the crypt. Elise moved toward the door. "I need to see the alcoves again." "Why?" "Because maybe we're not alone." Camille stared down at the monitor. The static had faded now. Only breath remained, not hers. The abbey bell hadn't rung in decades. It was cracked through the middle. A dull, black thing slouched in the stone belfry like a hanged crown. No rope, no mechanism. Just rusted air and dust. So when Camille heard it toll, once, deep and reversed, she dropped the baby monitor. The chime had come not from above, but beneath the floor. It unrolled through the stones like a voice submerged in oil, and though it was brief, it lingered. Elise burst into the hallway outside Camille's quarters a moment later, pale, lips parted. "You heard it too?" she asked. Camille nodded slowly. "Then it's not just us." Elise hesitated, then added, "I think Brother Morian knows what it means." Camille didn't ask why. She was already grabbing her coat. They found him in the sacristy, kneeling in front of an unlit candle. His spine was too straight, arms outstretched in the cruciform pose, as if mid-prayer, but his eyes were open, wide and unblinking, staring into nothing. He didn't move when they entered. "Brother Morian," Elise said, voice careful. "We need to ask you something about the bell." Still no movement. Camille stepped forward. "We know it came from the vault." Then suddenly, the monk twitched. His hands clenched. His neck cracked as he turned to face them. Camille took a step back. Brother Morian opened his mouth, and a sound spilled out like water from a cracked jar. Not a word, not language. Just backward murmuring, a chant, mangled by time. He spoke faster, and Camille's recorder, clipped to her hip, turned on by itself. It captured the sounds, the voice reversing the silence, syllables stuttering like scratched vinyl. "Ila, mi, ak, Lucille, Lucille, L, C-U-L." Camille's heart thudded in her chest. She reached for the recorder and hit playback. The sound reversed again, this time playing forward. "Lucille, Camille, why did you leave me there?" She dropped the recorder. It struck the stone floor and split open. Brother Morian had collapsed, unconscious or deeper. Elise knelt beside him, checking his pulse. "He's still breathing," she said. "But his mouth... Camille, look." Camille leaned in. The inside of his lips was sewn, not with thread. With flesh, scar tissue formed in careful loops, crossing. His mouth shut from the inside. "How the hell is he speaking?" Elise whispered. Camille couldn't answer. She felt sick. There was more. She knelt and pulled open the monk's robe collar. Beneath his throat, a sigil had been branded into his chest, one that matched the symbols carved above the reliquary vault, circular, twisted, like an ear turned inward. Elise backed away. He didn't take a vow. They stitched him silent. Camille stared at the monk's face, and somewhere behind his unconscious eyes, she sensed the scream still waiting. Not to be let out, but to be inhaled. She turned to Elise. "I need to go back down. Alone." "No," Elise said immediately. "Whatever's happening, it's escalating. We should leave. Get outside the perimeter." Camille shook her head. "It's not trying to kill me." "Then what?" Camille picked up the broken recorder and pocketed the cracked memory card. "It's trying to remember me." They stood there a moment longer, shadows stretching unnaturally along the candleless walls. Outside, the wind stirred again, but not forward. It pulled backward, like the breath of something remembering how to speak. Camille descended into the reliquary vault alone, the cold tightening around her ribs like fingers pressing just beneath the skin. Each step echoed longer than the last, bending off the stone as if the stairwell was stretching itself the deeper she went. She carried nothing but the cracked memory card from the recorder, a penlight, and the bone key, which pulsed warm against her thigh inside her pocket. When she passed the seal of the vault door, the silence surged again. Not just the absence of sound, but an active hush, like the air itself held its breath to listen. She went straight to the alcove where she had first seen the bone cradle, though it was gone now. In its place stood a new niche, a shallow recess carved with tiny, desperate handprints, too small to be adult, too stretched to be human. Inside it was a sealed glass reliquary box, shaped like a heart. No label, no plaque, just dust and breath-fogged glass. Camille's fingers hovered above it. She pressed down gently. The box opened. Inside was a hospital document, folded with mechanical precision. It was dry, brittle, but legible. She unfolded it. Her vision tunneled. Her name was typed across. The top: Camille Denard. Patient discharge summary dated November 11th, 2020, 4 weeks before her actual miscarriage. The summary stated that she had been discharged in stable condition following the birth of a live infant. No complications. Newborn female, transferred to a private pediatric care unit. Camille staggered back, the breath knocked from her lungs. "No," she whispered. "That's not what happened. That's not—" A sound rose behind her. Feathers. Rustling. Then the wet slop of flesh. She turned, heart in her throat, and vomited. Onto the stone floor spilled a tangle of gauze-wrapped objects, damp and slick, feathers matted with blood. Camille fell to her knees, gasping, coughing. The taste of salt and milk clung to her tongue. From within the mess, something moved. She reached into the feathers with shaking hands and pulled free a child's pacifier, the rubber nipple torn, the handle engraved with a name she had never told anyone, Lucille. The stone began to hum. Camille dropped the pacifier. Around her, the reliquary walls pulsed faintly, then more intensely, like lungs expanding. The air pressure changed. Her penlight flickered, and then she saw them, dozens of tiny mouths, stitched shut, embedded in the walls, all mouthing the same word. "Maman." She screamed. For the first time, she truly screamed, and her voice was eaten by the room. No echo, no return. The mouths stopped moving. The silence returned. She didn't remember how she got back to the cloister, only that when she looked in the mirror above the basin in her quarters, there was a mark across her stomach, a fine red line just beneath the skin, like the trace of a surgical scar. But she'd never had a C-section. And in her mouth, pressed beneath her tongue, she found a single white feather folded into a perfect spiral. Camille sat on the stone ledge beneath the cloister arches, staring into the fog-choked courtyard. The feather had disintegrated hours ago, dissolving on her tongue like communion ash. Her reflection in the basin was gone now. Not missing, but muddled. Every time she tried to look at herself, the water turned cloudy. She hadn't spoken since the reliquary, not to Elise, not even to herself. The pacifier, the forged hospital records, the regurgitated gauze, all pointed to a singular, impossible suggestion that her miscarriage wasn't an end, it was a detour. Something else had claimed Lucille and left behind a wound shaped like silence. By noon, she couldn't sit still. She needed answers. She needed proof that madness hadn't disguised itself as grief. She wandered the Abbey's east wing and found herself outside Brother Morian's door. It stood open. Inside, the room was a perfect square. No crucifix, no furniture, but a small cot and an altar carved with spirals. On the cot sat a wax cylinder phonograph, old, ancient, and beside it, a pile of sealed wax cylinders labeled in Latin and shorthand, Si Denard, Testamentum, S Infans Vocem. Camille inserted the first. The needle crackled. Then a voice played, her own. "This is Camille Denard. I'm leaving this message on. I don't know what date it is. It doesn't matter. I've been here before, many times. I always forget. That's part of the process." Camille stumbled backward, knocking over the cot. "They made me forget Lucille so I could feed her to the silence again. And every time I remember, she wakes up stronger." The audio warped, melted into low humming. Then a child's voice whispered, "Maman." She yanked the needle off the cylinder. Behind her, the baby monitor switched on. She hadn't brought it. It was just there now, on the altar, like it had been waiting. The red light blinked slowly. Camille stepped closer, unable to resist. The speaker was clearer than ever. A man's voice, steady and sad. "Camille, I can hear you breathing. You're close. Olivier." Her hand flew to her mouth. She hadn't said his name aloud since the hospital. "I know you're scared, but she's with me. She's not angry, just hungry. Come down. We miss you." A knock startled her from behind. Her room. Door. 3 slow raps. She turned the phonograph off, tucked the wax cylinder into her coat pocket and opened the door. No one stood outside, just a recording device, her own field recorder, the broken one. Its screen blinked blue. Camille pressed. Play a new voice. Olivier's. Do you remember the first time you felt her kick? You said it felt like butterflies, that she wanted to swim out of you. You said you'd name her Lucille, because it meant light. Camille dropped the recorder, because she had never said that out loud, not to anyone, not even Olivier. Her body began to shake, from cold, from memory, from the understanding that she had been speaking all along. Only no one heard, because the Abbey had swallowed the words before they ever reached the air. Later that evening, Camille returned to the reliquary to find Elise waiting. She was seated on the stone floor, staring at the opposite wall, jaw slack. When Camille stepped into the light, Elise turned to her slowly. I saw her, Elise whispered. She was in the wall, smiling, with teeth too small for her mouth. Camille knelt beside her. I think it's time, she said softly, that we both start listening. From the tunnel behind them something cooed, not in hunger, in anticipation. The Abbey had no clocks. Time was kept in breath and shadow. Camille didn't know what hour it was when she awoke face down on the reliquary floor, blood dried at the edge of her nose, the cold sinking deep into her joints. Elise was gone. She sat up slowly. Her coat was gone too, but the bone key remained in her palm, clenched so tightly her fingernails had broken the skin. Dried blood webbed across her wrist in fine spider vein lines, and from just beyond the vault's mouth she heard something faint, a lullaby, being sung by a man. She stood, shakily, pressed her back to the stone wall and listened. The voice was cracked with dust, low and halting, but unmistakably Olivier's. Camille moved toward it without thinking. The corridor had shifted again, grown longer, more twisted. The stones were darker here, wet and warm, lined with tiny alcoves that once held relics. Now, each cradled something moving, tiny limbs, half-formed jaws, silhouettes of impossible mouths flexing beneath translucent shrouds. She did not stop. The lullaby echoed ahead. Then a light appeared, yellow, swaying, a lantern through the tunnel's mist. It grew closer. Then, Olivier, she breathed. He stepped into view. The same grey coat, same gentle frown. His hair longer than she remembered. He looked exhausted, but real. Olivier, she said again. He smiled weakly. I couldn't stay away. I heard your voice, through the recordings. Camille stumbled forward into his arms. She pressed her face to his chest, feeling the warmth, the rise and fall. He smelled like rain and iron and memory. I thought I was losing my mind, she whispered. You are, he said gently. We both are. He pulled back, cupped her face. She's still down here, Camille. She remembers you. She forgives you. Camille's breath caught. I didn't mean to forget. I wanted to keep her. I tried. I know. His thumbs brushed tears from her cheeks. But she's hungry, Camille. The saint fed her silence, but she still needs a voice. What do you mean? Olivier leaned in close, whispered, Lucille wants you to sing to her. Camille's legs gave out. She sat hard on the stone floor. Olivier crouched beside her. I've seen what's at the bottom, he said. It's not death, it's memory, buried in ash, in milk, in hunger. Camille's hands trembled. She reached for the baby monitor, which was already in her pocket. She didn't question how it had returned. Olivier touched the speaker. It flickered, then lit. From it came the soft gurgle of a newborn breath, and then crying. Camille's chest caved inward, not in pain, in recognition. She remembered the sound. She had only heard it once, in a hospital, then nothing, and yet here it was. Olivier placed a hand on her stomach. You still carry her, he whispered. not in flesh, in sound. Camille looked into his eyes. "Are you real?" she asked. Olivier smiled. "Do you want me to be?" Behind him, the walls pulsed, exhaling. She could hear Lucille now, not a baby, not a ghost. A voice grown thick with silence, calling Maman. Elise had always believed in measurable things, load-bearing columns, tensile strength, equations, not chambers that changed dimensions when you looked away, not stone that breathed. She stood alone in what should have been the Eastern Rotunda. But it was wrong now. The walls moved with the pulse of something deep below. Not rhythmically like a heart, but slow, tidal, like lungs. She placed her hand against the wall. It exhaled. She jerked back, bile rising in her throat. The moisture on her palm wasn't condensation. It was warm, viscous. Behind her, something shuffled. "Elise?" She turned. Camille stood in the archway, pale and sweat-slicked, Olivier's coat around her shoulders. Her eyes looked different now, wider, hollowed, like a mirror catching only absence. "Elise," Camille repeated, "you need to see this." They moved deeper, through a corridor Elise hadn't seen before, but Camille swore it had always been there. No lights, no lanterns, just the faint glow of the phosphorescent veins in the ceiling, throbbing with what Elise now knew wasn't light at all, but sound turned into color. As they walked, Elise noticed something she hadn't earlier. The walls were whispering, at first just wind, then words, names, one she hadn't heard since she was 10, Margot. Her breath caught in her throat. She stopped walking. Camille turned. "What is it?" Elise stared into the wall. The glow shifted. A face formed in the stone. Small, smiling. Her sister. "Margot?" she whispered. The face blinked. "You said I wouldn't fall through," Margot said, voice liquid and thick. "You promised, and then the lake opened." Elise stumbled backward. No, that wasn't my fault. We were just kids. I didn't know the ice was thin. She never blamed you," Camille said softly. Elise's eyes flashed with panic. "You don't know anything about her. She's down here," Camille said, voice soft. "Just like Lucille." Elise shook her head. "No, that's not. This isn't possible. This place, this thing, it's turning our grief into architecture." Camille stepped closer, took Elise's trembling hand. "Yes, that's what it does. It makes echoes with our silence." Elise pulled her hand away. "We need to get out of here," she said. "I'm hearing things, seeing things. If we stay, we'll lose what's real." "We already did," Camille murmured. Suddenly a deep sound cracked through the corridor, like stone groaning underwater. The floor beneath them split, not wide, but enough. Elise tripped. Camille caught her wrist just in time. Below, through the fissure, Elise saw a black nursery, cradles, hundreds rocking themselves. And one, just one, was rocking faster, empty. Camille gritted her teeth and pulled Elise up, both women gasping as the crack sealed behind them like closing lips. Neither spoke as they limped forward, but the walls did, repeating Elise's name again and again, like a lullaby unraveling. The chapel smelled of smoke and wax, but no candles burned. Camille knew something was wrong the moment they emerged from the crypt tunnels. The air shimmered with a sour heat, and Brother Morian was nowhere to be seen. "Elise," she whispered. "Do you smell that?" Elise nodded slowly, eyes scanning the stone corridor. "Something's burning." They followed the scent, through the cloister, past the chapel's broken nave, to the sacristy, where Brother Morian had spent every evening in wordless devotion. The door was wide open. Inside, the floor blackened, with ash, not wood, not cloth, ash like hair, like flesh, and in the center of the room, Morian stood completely still, arms raised as if conducting a mass that no longer required music. Around him, 4 reliquary boxes smoldered, scorched beyond recognition. He had tried to burn the saints. Elise, Camille breathed, stepping forward. Don't speak. Just watch. Brother Morian's robe had fused with his skin in places, scorched into him like ceremonial brands. His back pulsed slowly, the outline of his spine visible beneath singed linen. He was humming something, a song, too low to hear clearly, but Elise's face drained of color. I know that melody, she whispered. It's Frère Jacques. Camille glanced at her. That's not possible. It is, Elise said, voice cracking. It's what Margot sang, right before the ice broke. Camille turned her gaze back to the monk. His hum intensified. He began to rock, back and forth, a trance. His mouth, the one that shouldn't open, was splitting now. Literally. The inner scar tissue began to pull apart. Thread lines of flesh, unraveling like stitched fabric. He turned to face them and opened his mouth fully. There was no tongue, no throat, only a tunnel. Stone-lined, breathing. The crypt itself had rooted inside him. He spoke, finally. Not in French, not in Latin, but in reverse. M-D-D-U-O-Y-Y-Y-B-U. You. Why did you? Me. His eyes were rolling white now. The ash around his feet began to spiral upward, caught in an invisible wind. Camille stepped forward. Morien, she said. What did you do? His body convulsed, then he split, not in a violent burst, but like paper soaked in water, the seam of him unfolding down the center, exposing not organs, but smoke, thick and dark, filled with faces. Infant faces, some screaming, some laughing. One looked just like Lucille. The ash swirled, twisted into symbols in midair. The sigil carved above the reliquary vault, repeated endlessly, reforming again and again like the mark of a failed baptism. Camille backed away. Elise was whispering something now, over and over. I didn't let go. I didn't. Let go. I didn't let go. The smoke began to speak, dozens of voices in overlapping whispers. We're still hungry. Silence feeds us. Say our names. Maman! 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 Camille grabbed Elise's hand and pulled her out. Behind them, Brother Morien collapsed, his skin folding in, sucking the smoke into himself as his body blackened and hardened into a statue of ash. When the last voice fell silent, his form crumbled. Nothing remained but his mouth, still stitched, still grinning, still warm, irreversible. Brother Morien was gone, but his mouth had learned to speak again, and the things inside him knew Camille's name. Camille and Elise fled the sacristy without speaking. The ashes of Brother Morien clung to their skin, mixed with sweat and soot, as if the air itself had decided to mark them. They didn't stop running until they reached the outer cloister, corridor, but there was no relief, because the abbey was changing again. What had once been narrow halls were now wider, but slanted, leaning inward like jawbones. The arches were deeper, the air heavier, and worst of all, the wind was gone. Not stillness, absence. The abbey had become a lung that had just inhaled and now waited. We need to get out, Elise panted. We leave. Now. Forget the relics, the sounds, the tunnels. We go. Right now. Camille didn't answer. She turned instead and looked toward the crypt stairwell. She didn't want to go back down. But there was something waiting. Someone. She still heard him in the baby monitor every few hours like clockwork. Olivier's voice whispering, "She's closer now. She remembers your breath." "Elise," Camille said slowly, "what if we already left? What if we've been trying to escape this place over and over again, but it just resets us?" Elise stared at her. That's insane. Then explain the recordings, the forgotten rooms, the faces in the walls. Margot, Elise, looked away. We try, Camille whispered. One more time. They navigated toward the Abbey's main entrance. But the corridor turned wrong. Too long, too angled, and lit only by that sickly thread-veined glow. Every few steps, they saw open doors that hadn't existed before. Inside each, a scene, a room, a life. Memories that had no place in the Abbey. One room held Camille's old apartment in Paris, down to the kettle she'd forgotten to return. Another was a hospital wing, frozen in the moment just before she had woken from anesthesia, the bed empty beside hers. The name tag still hung, Lucille Denard. Elise. Camille's voice cracked. We're not walking through corridors anymore. Elise looked into one room and gasped. Inside, a frozen lake. A girl standing on the ice, waving. Margot. She reached. Out, Elise screamed, stumbling back. The room vanished. Gone. Just blank wall now. They ran. The walls closed in, bent tighter. Their feet slid on damp stone as they stumbled into the crypt foyer again. Camille skidded to a stop, because she was already there, curled in the corner, dressed in the same coat, face hidden in her hands, breathing. Elise froze. Camille, she whispered. Camille stared at herself. The double lifted its face, and it was her, but younger. Before Lucille, before Olivier left, eyes wide with the hope of a mother not yet broken. And then she spoke. I won't forget again, I promise. The real Camille stepped back. No, I'll carry her all the way this time. And then, the double Camille burst into cinders, unraveling like parchment touched by flame. Only the baby monitor remained. It played a lullaby, and then, the sound of water breaking, a low gurgle, wet, slow, birth. Elise fell to her knees, weeping. Camille picked up the monitor with trembling hands. It was cracked down the middle now, not like before. This time it had grown teeth. The Abbey had swallowed time. There were no hours now, no minutes, only memory. And it was rotting. Camille sat cross-legged in the dust-choked nave, baby monitor resting in her lap like an offering. Elise knelt nearby, curled against a column. Base, her knuckles raw, lips whispering names that had long since lost meaning. They had tried every exit. The front gates, bricked over. The bell tower. Spiral staircase ended in a mirror that reflected someone else's face. Even the path back to the courtyard looped in on itself, showing Camille the same scene 5 times. A cradle swinging in an empty room, a feather floating in stagnant air, a woman kneeling before a blank wall, asking it to remember. Each time the woman looked more like her. Now they were both exhausted. We're trapped in a memory, Elise murmured. Not the Abbey's, ours. Camille looked down at the monitor. The teeth on the speaker grill had sharpened, almost like they'd grown inward, biting into the static. Do you know what that means? Camille asked quietly. Elise's eyes were blank. It means something down there knows our grief better than we do. It plays it like a hymn. A low whine buzzed through the monitor. Camille reached out and pressed a single finger to the speaker. Silence. Then, I remember the name. Camille's spine stiffened. She didn't ask whose voice it was. It wasn't Olivier's. It wasn't hers. It was Lucille's. Older now, not a baby, a child, learning how to use language shaped by bone and absence. I remember. The name, the voice said again, stronger. Lucille. 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 The monitor's plastic cracked louder with each repetition. Elise crawled closer. What if saying it feeds her? Camille looked at her. What if not saying it starves her? The monitor erupted in a high-pitched scream, not loud, just perfectly tuned to something inside Camille's skull. She dropped it. It clattered across the stone and landed facing upward, and from its jagged speaker came the sound of breathing. Her own, looped, distorted, then footsteps, soft, barefoot, small. The air went still, and Camille turned to see herself. Again. This time, not a ghost, not a cinder shadow, a mirror. She stood across the nave, same coat, same braid. But she was pregnant. 8 months. Belly round and full, hands cradling it gently, the version of herself she had almost become. Camille blinked. "No," the mirrored version spoke. "You have to say goodbye before the birth." "What are you?" "I'm the one who held her." Camille fell to her knees. "That never happened. I didn't get to. I woke up and—" "You did," the woman said gently. "You just let the silence erase it." Camille reached for her, but the figure dissolved into cradles, folding open like ribs, cradles swinging in rows down the nave. Each one held an echo, a name, a cry, a shadow. And then from the shadows beyond the last cradle came a sound no human throat should make, gurgling hunger. Then, click. The baby monitor's red light turned off. Camille screamed, but it wasn't hers. She turned around and saw Elise, backed into the corner, frozen, staring at the wall. Her mouth was open, jaw trembling. From inside Elise's throat came a child's laughter, high, mocking, wet. "Elise," Camille whispered, stepping forward. But the laugh had already stopped, and the voice that came next was Camille's. "We already came through. This part, remember? We're just looping until we get it right." Elise turned her head, slowly, and her eyes were no longer hers. They were mirrors. Elise didn't blink. She stared at Camille from the corner of the nave, her irises now silvered over like old mirrors left too long in damp air. Her lips moved, but her voice was wrong, too even, too young. "You let the hospital take me. You let the silence swallow me." Camille backed away. "Stop. I wasn't too small. I just wasn't loud enough." "Elise," Camille tried, voice shaking. "You're not her. You're still Elise. This isn't how memory works." "No," said the voice, smiling now through Elise's teeth. "But this is how hunger works." Elise blinked once and collapsed. Just like that. Camille rushed forward, catching her just before her head struck the stone. She was breathing, shallow, eyes rolled back, lips twitching. The spell had passed, or receded. Something had used her, spoken through her. Camille laid her down gently and stood, staring around the nave. The air crackled, the stone clicked, and a slow sound began to rise from beneath the floorboards, a heartbeat. It wasn't fast. It wasn't weak. It was deliberate, heavy, growing. And then she felt it inside her own chest, not her heartbeat. Lucille's. The baby monitor buzzed alive again, speaker now visibly rising and falling as if exhaling. Camille picked it up. Voice whispered, "Come lower, maman. Come to the chamber below the blood." Her legs moved without thinking, through the cloister, down the second stairwell, past the corridor that hadn't existed before yesterday. Her hands gripped the bone key, sweat-slicked, pulsing with heat. The lowest vault had been sealed when she arrived, but now the air was open, like a mouth waiting to be entered. She stepped inside and found a spiral staircase made of vertebrae. It went down and down into blackness lit only by the humming glow of flesh-threaded walls. She descended 20 steps, then 30, then lost count. At the bottom, a door, not wood, not stone, woven skin. It pulsed faintly, veins visible beneath the surface, and at its center was a circular slot, a keyhole. Camille hesitated. Then she inserted The bone key. The door didn't unlock. It shuddered, contracted, then opened inward like muscle tissue parting. And Camille stepped into the cradle room. Dozens of cribs hung from the ceiling, swaying in a rhythm she recognized, her own breathing. Each one was filled with something that wasn't quite a baby. Wrapped shapes, muffled coos, mouths stitched or split. But only one cradle, centered in the dark, surrounded by concentric chalk circles, was empty. And above it, carved into the eye, stone in blood, Maman revient, Mother returns. Camille felt her knees give. She knelt beside the cradle. There, resting inside, was a tiny handprint, burnt into the linen. The air around her shifted. The monitor buzzed again. Louder now, urgent. "You remember her now," said Olivier's voice. "She remembers you." The cradle rocked once, then again, then slowly. It sighed, and Camille whispered, "Lucille." The stone beneath her feet cracked, a birthing pang in the architecture. Something was coming. Lucille wanted out. Camille's breath caught in her throat as the stone beneath her knees pulsed. Not shook, but expanded, like something inside the ground was stretching into being. The cradle before her remained empty, yet warm. The tiny handprint embedded into the linen smoldered slightly at the edges, re-searing itself each time she blinked. Something beneath the crib creaked. A second cradle, smaller, rose from the floor. No rope, no chain. Simply emerged, grown from the stone. Inside, not a child, not remains, but a tape recorder, outdated, military grade, covered in fingerprints. Dried blood speckled the buttons. Camille stared, and suddenly, she remembered it. She had seen this recorder before, in a file box at the ministry. It had been misfiled, labeled Acoustic Anomalies, Haut-Var region, a footnote in a larger investigation. She had ignored it. She had buried it. Camille pressed play. Entry log, Father Séraphin, April 2nd, 1961. Test of the chamber's acoustics failed again. Infant subjects emit vocalization in 3 waves. Third wave always results in loss of coherence. Subject L16 recorded with full vocal capacity before cradling procedure. Silence achieved via surgical weaving. The saint requires absolute quiet. Camille Denard, initiate class, observed procedure. No response. Subject survived cradling, but forgot. Camille's hands trembled. She dropped the recorder. Initiate. Class? She breathed. No, that's not possible, but it was, because she had been here before, not as a researcher. Not even as a mother, as a participant. Her pregnancy had been monitored, her grief engineered. She stepped backward, reeling. Her boot struck a hollow space in the floor, a hatch. She knelt, brushing aside the chalk circle. A brass ring revealed itself. She pulled it. With a slow, earthy groan, the hatch opened into a subchamber, darker than any she had seen before. She lowered herself down with shaking limbs. The walls here were smooth, polished, sanitized. This was no ancient crypt. This was a modern facility. Wires still dangled from the corners. A rusted nameplate on the wall read, Seraphine Initiative, Acoustic Incubation, Stage 3. Camille staggered forward. On the far wall hung photographs, dozens, faded Polaroids, infants, all cradled in stone, all mouths stitched shut. And beside each photo, a mother's face. Some wept, some smiled. One was hers. She had been here, in this room, in that cradle. She had given Lucille to the silence, but she had forgotten. They had made her forget. A table stood in the center of the room. A surgical drape covered something beneath it. Camille peeled it back. There lay a ledger open to a single page. Subject L18, Lucille Denard. Donor Camille Denard. Voluntary acceptance of amnesia approved. Status dormant. Vocal residue detected. Incubation extended. Recommendation: vocal anchor retrieval required to complete phase. Camille covered her mouth, and in the corner of the room, resting on a shelf, a tiny jar. Inside, a single severed tongue. Still pink, still twitching, wrapped in gauze, labeled, "Lucille, do not reintroduce." Camille turned and vomited. Her body convulsed, her scream echoed, but the walls didn't answer. They absorbed. A twisted lullaby rose from the cradle above, muffled and wet. She climbed out of the subchamber, clutching the ledger and the jar. Something had changed, not just the walls, herself. She wasn't a victim of grief anymore. She was a keeper of it, and the saint had chosen her again. The ledger clutched in Camille's arms, pulsed with a faint warmth, as if the memories within had never truly cooled. Her fingers smeared the ink as she walked, shaking, bloodied, changed. She didn't remember climbing back out of the spiral bone stairwell, only that now she stood in the cloister again, and the light had vanished. Not night, not shadow, an eclipse of the soul. Everything was wrong-shaped. The angles of the corridor leaned subtly inward, as if reality itself had tilted, and the arches breathed with her every footstep. At the far end of the walkway stood Olivier, arms folded, head lowered, wearing the same coat, same posture. But Camille felt a coldness crawl up her spine like fingers made of smoke. He smiled when he saw her. "Camille," he said softly, "you look tired." She didn't move. "You found it, didn't you?" he asked. "The truth, the ledger." She swallowed hard. "I don't remember signing anything." Olivier stepped toward her, slow and gentle. "You don't remember a lot of things," he said. "You don't remember the first time Lucille opened her mouth, or the way you screamed when you heard her call you maman inside the walls." He stepped closer. "You don't remember how many times you've come back here, how many times you've promised to fix it, how many times you failed." Camille backed away. "I never." "You did." His voice cracked slightly. "You always do. You beg for your memory to be taken, and they oblige. It's part of the process. The saint doesn't want mothers. It wants vocal carriers, echoes, mothers who forget how to scream." Her pulse pounded. She looked down at his feet. No shadow. He saw her noticing and smiled wider, too wide. "Do you want to know where I've really been?" Camille took another step back. "You're not him." The thing wearing Olivier's face nodded slowly. "No, but he came here once. The real Olivier. He heard the tapes. He followed your voice into the reliquary. Where is he?" A long silence. Then the voice said, "She tried to be born through him. She wanted him to carry her breath." Camille's knees gave, and she gripped the stone railing to stay upright. But he wasn't strong enough. He had no wound to pour into. "You used him," she whispered. The entity tilted its head. "I offered him a choice." She looked up, her voice barely audible. "What are you?" He stepped closer, and now the walls behind him pulled inward, folding like fabric. "I am what remains when grief isn't given language," he said. "When mourning becomes marrow." He raised his hand. From his palm unfolded a long umbilical, cord made of black thread, knotted with names. "Lucille is waiting," the voice said, "and she wants her tongue back." Camille's hand gripped the gauze-wrapped jar tighter, the twitching thing inside growing warmer by the second. "If I give this to her," she said, "what happens to me?" He smiled gently. "You'll be unburdened. You'll forget everything again, and she'll be whole." Camille felt something wet on her lips. She wiped it. Milk. Her body had begun to leak. Her cells remembered something her mind had forgotten. The voice stepped forward, closing the distance. "Let me carry her this time," it whispered, holding out its hands. "You were never meant to bear this alone." She hesitated, then looked down. The jar moved on its own. The tongue inside curled, forming her name on the glass. Camille. She threw the jar, shattered. The thing that wore Olivier's skin screamed, a sound that bent the walls backward, stone fracturing like porcelain. And from the fragments of the jar, Lucille's voice emerged. Not a cry, not a wail, but a song, broken, reborn. The sound that poured from the broken jar was not of this world. It was not a baby's voice. It was many voices layered. Newborn gurgles spliced with childlike humming, choked sobs knotted into lullabies sung through water. It clung to the air, like smoke, like milk left too long in the throat. Camille stumbled backward, hands over her ears, but it didn't help. The sound vibrated inside her bones. It knew her marrow. It had grown there. The thing that had worn Olivier's skin staggered, convulsing in the center of the cloister, its shape warping, his limbs lengthening, his skin splitting, his face rearranging into something non-linear, something stitched from remembered grief. It crawled across the floor on all fours, mouth opening wider than any human jaw should, an inverted cradle, jawbone unhinged. Elise appeared at the far end of the cloister, barefoot, her eyes rimmed with red, hair soaked with sweat. She was carrying something, the broken baby monitor wrapped in cloth like a dying relic. Camille's eyes widened. "Elise, what are you doing?" Elise didn't speak. Her steps were slow, ritualistic. She looked straight at the writhing creature. As it howled Olivier's name backward, she passed Camille, never breaking stride. "Elise, stop!" Camille cried. Elise turned, eyes strangely calm. "I remember now," she said softly, "what she looked like under the ice." Camille shook her head. "That's not your voice talking." "No," Elise said. "It's hers, and it's time. She hears mine." She stepped into the circle of broken glass and cradled the monitor like a newborn. The air hummed louder. The glow from the veins in the abbey's stone flared, like a heartbeat rupturing. Elise looked down at the monitor. Her lips parted. "I never told you to let go, Margot," she whispered. Camille stepped forward, terrified. "Elise, don't do this. We can still get out." "There's no outside," Elise said, smiling. "There never was. Not for people like us." Then softly, "I give her my silence." And she pressed the monitor to her chest. The device sparked, twitched, sank into her sternum as if swallowed whole. Her body arched, spasmed, and then froze. She stood like a statue, head tilted back, mouth open but utterly silent. All sound in the cloister ceased. The crawling entity stopped mid-motion. The broken walls held their breath. Even Camille felt her pulse go still. Then Elise's body began to crack, not flesh, not blood. Stone. She was turning to marble, right before Camille's eyes. Veins hardening, eyes dimming, mouth still open. In an eternal scream, she had offered to Lucille. And inside that silence, something shifted. The saint without a mouth had taken her vow. The ground beneath the cloister split, and Camille dropped to her knees as a massive slab of stone rose from the earth. A new altar formed of Elise's petrified remains, her hands still clutched around the hollow that once held the monitor. From the base of the altar, a whisper curled through the air. "Merci, sir." "Thank you, sister." Camille wept, but the tears came soundlessly. She had no voice left to mourn, and in the stillness, Lucille stirred deeper within the walls. Elise was gone, but her silence had purchased a final passage. The altar rose until it scraped the chapel's arch, casting long shadows like broken ribs across the cloister floor. Elise's petrified body was fused into the stone, eyes wide, mouth open, a sculpted scream, now frozen in eternal surrender. Camille didn't speak. She couldn't. Every breath hurt, every inhale tasted like ash and milk. The baby monitor was gone, consumed by Elise's offering. And yet the silence it left behind was not empty. It was alive. It throbbed beneath the floor, moved in the walls, curled inside Camille's ears like whispering infants whose lungs had never known air. She stood slowly, barefoot now, her shoes lost somewhere between chambers. The altar pulsed once, in invitation. She followed the pulse, down the spiral stair again, past the cradles, past the sigils that now writhed along the walls like insects moving through skin. The vault had opened wider. A final descent waited. Camille entered it barefoot, trailing blood from the soles of her feet, her mouth dry, her limbs cold with resolve. The corridor led to a cathedral underground, larger than the abbey above, carved not by hand but by ritual. The walls were smooth and wet, lit by veins that pulsed with dim violet light. And at the far end, where an altar should have stood, was a throne of flesh. It was not seated. It hung, suspended by hundreds of cords, umbilical, surgical, ceremonial, was a humanoid mass, eyeless, armless, mouthless. A face unformed, lips sewn into the suggestion of silence, limbs like softened bone cradled in linen and hair and wire. It breathed, loudly, wetly, and Camille fell to her knees. "The saint," she whispered. "You're real." The thing shifted slightly at the sound, as if drawn to the vibration, not by sense, by absence. It had no eyes, but it could feel her forgetting. Camille crawled closer. She could feel Lucille in the walls now, around her, beneath her skin, beneath her ribs. Her child's memory coiled into the architecture of this place. "Why?" Camille whispered. "Why take her from me?" The saint twitched, threads of voice, ghosts, spiraled from the ceiling. Camille heard herself speaking, in rewind. "You said you didn't want to carry this. You asked to forget. You signed. You gave her to the chamber." She clutched her head. "No, I didn't know what I was signing. I didn't understand." The saint's chest rose, its silence deepened. Around its bloated torso, Camille saw relics sewn into its flesh. Pacifiers, sonograms, stitched names, stitched mouths, stitched grief. And then, the hum began. Low, beautiful, terrible, a lullaby, with no words, a melody meant for no one. The entire vault sang, and Camille screamed. Her scream was not hers. It had Lucille's pitch, Lucille's rage. She reached into her coat, pulled free the ledger, and held it high. "I remember now," she sobbed. "I remember everything. Her name, her weight, her first breath." "You don't get to keep her anymore," the saint recoiled, its form shuddered, seams trembling. Camille crawled to the base of the throne and slammed the ledger against its flesh. The paper caught fire, with no flame, just heat from memory. The saint sagged, its cords snapping one by one, and then it dropped. Heavy, soft, real. It lay before her now, shivering like a newborn, mouth sealed, eyes shut, a god born from maternal erasure. Camille leaned forward and placed her lips to its brow. "I name her Lucille," she whispered, "and I take her back." From the stitched mouth came a sudden pulse of warm air, and then the threads burst. The saint's mouth opened, no scream, no roar, only a breath. That smelled like milk, that felt like forgiveness, and Camille wept, because the silence was finally hers. The silence had shifted. It was no longer oppressive nor vacant. It had become hollow, like a room waiting for a voice it once knew. Camille knelt before the saint without a mouth, whose flesh no longer pulsed, whose cords had gone slack across. the stone like vines after a harvest. The body was still warm, but it was empty. She reached out, touched its brow once more. No breath returned this time, no recoil. The stitched mouth hung slightly open now, a frayed oval that had once been the gate through which memory was unmade. She stood. Her legs ached as though she had birthed something herself. An old ache, a familiar one. Her fingertips were stained red with ash and ink. In her mind, the ledger still burned, though the smell of scorched paper had faded. The descent was over, and now something else waited. She climbed back up through the reliquary, barefoot, following her own bloody footprints. They led her through the bone stairwell, into the cradle chamber where she'd first seen the sigil carved in circles. But now, the cradle at the center was full, no longer empty, no longer cold. Swaddled in antique linen, resting in the nest of chalk and thread, was a small shape, not breathing, not moving, but present. Camille moved toward it, trembling. Lucille. She reached down. The linen unraveled at her touch. Inside was not a baby, not a body, not remains. It was a mouth, a perfect, impossibly small infant's mouth, untouched by age, hovering in the cradle like a curled petal. No eyes, no limbs, just the organ of sound, finally unstitched. And it was singing, softly, tenderly, a lullaby with no lyrics. Camille didn't recoil. She leaned down and, without knowing why, opened her own lips. The song poured from her, matched the mouth, blended into it. And for the first time in this womb of stone, Camille and Lucille sang together. Tears streamed down her cheeks, not of grief, but of recognition. This voice, this sound, had lived inside her since the miscarriage. Not in her body, but in the parts no hospital could diagnose. It had just been waiting for her to sing it back. The mouth in the cradle sang louder, and Camille saw the chalk symbols melt into the stone. The abbey trembled, not violently, but rhythmically. In time with the song, one of the cribs overhead broke loose, fell, and shattered. Inside was only a recording tape marked CD1 retention session. Another cradle broke, and another. The ceiling crumbled like brittle parchment, revealing the blackened bones of previous mothers' silences. But Camille sang on, and the cradle began to lower itself, sinking gently into the floor. As it vanished, the mouth faded, not into death, into rest. And Camille whispered into the silence left behind. "Sleep now, Lucille. You don't have to wait for me anymore." Then, a voice from behind, not her own, not Lucille's, a child, maybe 6, calm, clear, almost amused. "Why did you wait so long, maman?" Camille turned, and the hallway behind her was open. Light spilled in, real light, sunlight, and a tiny figure stood just at the edge of it, watching, smiling. The light that poured through the newly opened corridor was golden, soft-edged, not the artificial fluorescence of the abbey's upper quarters, nor the phantasmal glow of the reliquary veins. This was sunlight, real, warm, morning. It made no sense. Camille stepped toward it, slowly, like someone approaching a memory she wasn't sure she'd earned. The shape in the doorway, a child's silhouette, remained still. Short, barefoot, wrapped in a faded cotton smock the color of old parchment. Her hair fell in curls over her brow, her hands clasped in front of her. She didn't speak again. She just waited. Camille's throat burned with questions, but none came. Her vocal cords had grown raw from song. She moved into the light, crossing the threshold, leaving the cradle chamber behind. The corridor beyond wasn't part of the abbey's original blueprint. The stones were too smooth, the air too fragrant, like milk and wildflowers, like a nursery where no death had ever occurred. The little girl turned, and walked without a word. Camille followed. They moved in silence through a hallway that curved, subtly downward. It wasn't claustrophobic, it was womb-like, protective, rounded in the corners, carved to fit something that no longer needed to be born. The child stopped at the end. A small wooden door stood before them, painted white, flaking, just like the nursery door from Camille's Paris apartment. The one she'd decorated with moon and star stickers, months before she lost Lucille. Camille's breath hitched. The little girl reached up and pushed it open. Inside, a nursery, perfectly preserved. Not imagined. Not spectral, real. A rocking chair, a mobile of clouds and birds, stuffed animals in a perfect line. The same changing table Camille had thrown out a week after the miscarriage. On the crib's wall hung a frame, Lucille's sonogram. She moved toward it like in a dream. Everything here had been carried from her past, pieces stolen, copied, and protected somewhere deep beneath the monastery, as if the abbey had tried to build her memory back wrong, and this was its apology. She touched the crib and gasped. Her breath stopped, not by force, not by fear. It simply ceased, like her lungs no longer needed to move. Camille looked down. Her hands were pale, fingers trembling. Her nails had begun to yellow, the veins darkening beneath her skin. She turned to the child. The girl was watching her, expression neutral. Camille knelt. Lucille? The child tilted her head. Not all of me. Camille's voice came out dry, airless. What does that mean? You gave me a cradle, she said, but you never gave me a breath. Tears welled in Camille's eyes. I tried. I wanted to. You gave my name to a stone, Lucille said, but not to the sky. You buried it. You let them undo me. Camille looked at her arms, her skin now flaking like paper. She was being unwritten. I'm sorry, she whispered. Lucille stepped forward, touched her cheek with a hand that was ice cold and soft as ash. It's okay, maman, she said. You can stay with me now. Camille's lungs contracted. Still no breath, no pain, just stillness. Outside the nursery door, the light faded, the stone closed in, and Camille knew. This was the cost of the song, the end of the forgetting. To return the voice, she had given hers, and, as she slumped into the rocking chair, her body folding inward, Lucille climbed into her lap, humming softly. Together, they rocked. No more screams, no more monitors, no more saint, only the creak of old wood, and a silence that finally felt like home. Camille didn't move. She no longer could. Her limbs rested like hollow branches, curled around Lucille's slight frame as they rocked together in the quiet nursery buried beneath St. Florent Abbey. The rocking chair creaked with perfect rhythm. Breaths. Replacement. A lullaby made of motion. Lucille was weightless in her lap. Her small hand pressed against Camille's chest, as if trying to coax her heart to beat again. But it didn't. Not once. Camille had made her final offering. She had given Lucille the one thing the Abbey could not forge or steal. Her breath. Her silence. The girl in her arms was still humming, low, circular, the same tune that had once echoed backward through the baby monitor. But it was forward now, clean, unbroken, and Camille smiled, faintly, glassy-eyed. She was not dead. She was archived. Above them, the upper vault groaned open once more. A wind stirred the cloister that hadn't moved in centuries, and from beneath, the saint's fallen throne, a bookcase rose, impossibly tall, impossibly wide, made of pressed bone and resin-soaked vellum. Each shelf held one name, burned into the spine of leather-wrapped ledgers: Agnès Dupont, Thérèse Mornay, Margot Prieur, Camille Denard. Bound memories. lives removed so they could be remembered without sound. The reliquary had never been a graveyard. It was a library, a place where grief was stored, not healed. And now, Camille's story joined the collection. On the central pedestal of the bone archive sat a freshly transcribed manuscript, still steaming with ink. Its first line read, "Subject CD19, successful reintegration with reclaimed voice. Final phase, rocking sequence initiated, silence sustained, inheritance protocol activated." Below the ledger, in a wax envelope sealed with the saints' sigil, was a simple note written in the curled hand of someone long dead. "If another mother should come, do not tell her everything. Let her carry the song alone until it's heavy enough to sing," and someone was coming. Footsteps echoed in the nave above. Soft, careful, measured. A new archivist, sent by the ministry. A man named Jules Morel, curious, analytical, unmarried, drawn to St. Florent's gaps in record-keeping. He would find the broken cradles, the ash altar, Elise's frozen scream carved in stone, Camille's final breath in the nursery, arms curled around a girl who might not be there at all. And in a sealed drawer hidden behind the archive wall, Jules would find something even more impossible. A freshly reassembled baby monitor, its red light blinking, waiting, recording. The nursery was darker now, not from absence of light but from decay of memory. The wallpaper peeled in slow spirals. The crib splintered at its corners. The mobile above the rocking chair no longer spun. Its birds hung limp, each with thread. Around its beak like miniature nooses, Camille remained still, eyes half-lidded, chest unmoving. She was neither corpse nor mother anymore. Something in between, held in pause, the final breath given, the body waiting. Lucille still sat in her lap, but she wasn't humming now. She was watching, growing, not older, clearer. Each moment in the chair sharpened her, like she was being stitched into the world one line at a time. The longer Camille rocked, the more her own outline began to fade, flesh blurred, hair dulled, fingers turned porous. She was becoming the memory, not the keeper. Then, the room shivered, the walls cracked. Stone pushed inward, as if the abbey itself was straining to breathe again. Something beyond the nursery had changed. A threshold opened. Lucille turned. "I'm strong enough now," she said. Her voice was calm, precise. She stood and stepped, out of Camille's lap. The instant contact was broken. Camille gasped. Inhaling for the first time in hours, her chest rose, her lungs screamed. The sound was raw, like a wound re-tearing after years of scar tissue. Her voice, used again. Lucille faced her. "You can go now," she said gently. "I don't need you to hold it anymore." Camille's lips trembled. "But if I leave?" "You forget," Lucille said. "That's the rule." Camille looked at her hands, color returning, weight returning. Lucille placed a pale hand over Camille's heart. "You can carry the memory and leave the name, or you can stay and carry nothing." Camille wept, not out of fear, out of the horror of choice. To remember Lucille was to remain in this place, as an echo, as stone, as sound without source. To leave was to survive, to walk into sunlight again, but never speak her name, never say Lucille again. The silence would be final. The room began to collapse. The mobile spun in reverse, birds twitching. The floor hissed as the veins of the abbey closed themselves off. She had seconds, Lucille smiled. "You sang me back." That was enough. Camille leaned forward, kissed her on the brow, her lips barely brushing warm skin. "I will always remember you," she whispered. Lucille only nodded. "But you won't know why." And then Camille turned, limped toward the door, her lungs full, her tongue heavy. She looked back once. Lucille sat in the rocking chair now, smiling. The room collapsed behind her, sealed forever. Camille stepped into the corridor. Light met her. Daylight, the sun. And as her foot crossed the Abbey's ruined threshold, her mind slipped. She blinked and forgot the name she had been holding. Lucille faded from her memory like breath against glass. Only the rhythm remained, rocking, creaking, somewhere deep beneath the earth. Years later, the Abbey was quiet again. Saint Florent had become what it always threatened to be, a relic without keepers, sealed off by the Ministry for Structural Instability and Non-Standard Acoustics. It remained untouched, archived, half swallowed by ivy and moss, its crypt doors chained shut, its upper vault flooded with still air. Only the library vault remained monitored. Officially, it did not exist. Unofficially, it kept singing. Jules Morel, Junior Field Archivist, Ministry of Cultural Heritage, arrived on a cloudy April morning. He carried a case of equipment, a thermos of black coffee, and the most recent report, persistent harmonic anomaly, audible subfrequency, human vocal range, source unidentifiable. He entered the Abbey. He did not notice the sigil above the gate. No one ever did. His first steps through the cloister echoed for too long. His flashlight flickered in places the air felt thick. He found the vault door ajar, not rusted, but polished, the stone around it smooth, as if hundreds of hands had touched it in mourning. And behind the final shelf in the reliquary archive, Jules uncovered a sealed drawer. No key, no markings, only a handprint scorched into the wood, child-sized. He hesitated, then opened it. Inside, a baby monitor, cracked, yellowed, familiar, grinning through the fractured speaker grill. He turned it over. No power, no cords, no batteries. But the red light was blinking, steady, alive. Curious, Jules set it on the desk and flicked on his recorder. For a moment, nothing. Then static. Then breathing. Then a voice. Soft, small, musical. Rock, a bye baby. In the Saints' Hall. Jules froze. The temperature dropped. When mother forgets you, you never fall. The monitor hissed louder. The speaker pulsed. A new voice joined in. Older, feminine, familiar to none but the walls. Sleep now in silence, the cradle is near. Then, a final whisper. Merci, maman. And the monitor smiled, its fractured speaker grill split wider. Not just a crack now, but a grin. A perfect, grotesque, tiny mouth. Jules dropped his recorder because he remembered. Just for a second. He remembered the name, Lucille. And then he forgot it forever. The monitor's light turned off. Somewhere deep beneath, Saint Florent, in a nursery with no door and no breath, a rocking chair creaked once. Then silence. Still here? Brave. Or maybe you just like the feeling of being watched. Like, subscribe, and drop your time and location in the comments, so we know who's still out there. Now breathe slow. The worst is coming. Story 2. Robert had always found comfort in the late-night hours. The mall was quieter, the usual hum of the daytime bustle now replaced by the distant echoes of his own footsteps. He loved the solitude, the peace it brought. But tonight, something felt different, like an itch at the back of his mind, a nagging sense of unease he couldn't shake. The hallways stretched out before him, dimly lit by the flickering fluorescent lights overhead, casting long, jagged shadows along the polished tile floors. It was as if the mall itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. The rain outside pounded against the glass windows like a drum, the wind howling as it swept through the empty parking lot. Robert wrapped his jacket tighter around his shoulders, shivering despite the warmth of the security office. As he walked down the hall toward the far end of the mall, a strange silence seemed to fall over everything. The usual sounds, the hum of the HVAC system, the occasional creak of the building settling, had all vanished, leaving only the rhythmic sound of his own boots on the floor. He paused for a moment, letting his gaze drift over the empty storefronts. The mannequins in the windows stood like silent sentinels, their vacant eyes fixed on nothing in particular. The mall felt abandoned, even though he knew it wasn't. He had made this walk countless times before, but tonight it felt different, more oppressive, as if something was waiting just out of sight, watching him from the shadows. His flashlight, the only source of light other than the flickering overheads, cast eerie reflections on the glass and metal. He shone it down the hallway ahead of him, the beam cutting through the darkness. It was then that he saw it. At the far end of the hallway, standing just beyond the reach of the dim lights, was a figure. A man, dressed in a hoodie, facing away from him. The hood was pulled low, obscuring the figure's face, but there was something about the way he stood that sent a chill crawling up Robert's spine. He was motionless, too still. Robert's breath caught in his throat as the figure didn't even flinch when he called out to him. "Hey, you need to get out of here," Robert shouted, his voice louder than he intended. "This mall is closed. You can't be here." The figure remained perfectly still. "Hey!" Robert called again, more forcefully this time. The words hung in the air, echoing off the distant walls of the empty mall. But the man did not move. Robert's heart began to race as he felt a knot tighten in his stomach. The longer he stared at the unmoving figure, the more wrong it seemed. His first instinct was to walk over and confront the man. He couldn't explain why, but something inside him told him to approach, to make sure this was just some prank or a lost soul who didn't know any better. He took a cautious step forward, his boots echoing too loudly in the oppressive silence of the mall. Each step seemed to stretch the distance between him and the figure, as though the hallway was growing longer. The lights flickered again, a brief strobe-like effect that made Robert's skin crawl. He stopped dead in his tracks. The figure didn't move, but something had changed. The mall had fallen into an unnatural quiet, as if the world itself had stopped. The flickering lights seemed to distort the air around him, making the mall feel even more surreal. He took another step forward, and then the figure was gone. Robert froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The hallway ahead was empty. He scanned the area, the hairs on his neck standing on end. There was no sign of the man, no movement at all. He blinked and looked again. Nothing. Just the long, empty hallway stretching off into the darkness. What the hell? Robert whispered to himself, his breath catching in his throat. He quickly turned and sprinted back toward the security office, his mind racing. The adrenaline surged in his veins as he fumbled for his keys, desperate to get back to the safety of the monitor room. But even as he ran, something gnawed at him, the feeling that he wasn't alone. The sensation that the hallway, the mall itself, was watching him. The security office door creaked open, the familiar hum of the monitors greeting him. He closed the door behind him with a shaky breath and sat down in front of the console. His fingers trembled as he flipped through the security footage from the hallway, rewinding the feed from the last few minutes. At first, he saw nothing unusual. Just the empty hallway, the flickering lights, the occasional reflection of a nearby storefront in the glass. But then, the figure appeared again on the screen. He watched, riveted, as the figure stood motionless at the far end of the hall. His heart skipped a beat. There it was. The same hooded figure standing still, as if frozen in time. Robert fast-forwarded through the footage. There was no sign of the figure leaving, no movement at all. It was as though he had simply materialized in that spot. And then, as Robert watched, the figure vanished. The screen cut to black for a fraction of a second. and when it returned, the figure was gone. There was no sign of him ever being there. Robert's pulse quickened. He rewound the footage again, slower this time. The figure was there, standing still. Then, nothing. No sign of him leaving. No footsteps. No movement at all. Am I losing my mind? Robert whispered under his breath, his voice shaking. His hands were clammy, his mind spiraling with questions. He couldn't explain it, couldn't rationalize it. There had been no one there, yet on the footage, there he was. And the strangest part, there was no trace of the man's presence. It was as if he had never been there at all. Robert sat back, staring at the screen in disbelief. A cold shiver ran down his spine. He tried to shake off the dread building in his chest. Maybe it was a glitch in the system. Maybe it was nothing. But the hollow, gnawing feeling in his gut told him otherwise. He turned back to the screen, his breath catching as he stared into the blank darkness of the hallway on the C monitor. He was about to turn away when the lights flickered once again, and then, as if to mock his fear, a shape appeared at the far end of the hall. But this time, it wasn't just the figure. It was more. Something else. The shadow on the screen wasn't just standing still. It moved, jerking and twisting as though the figure was contorting. And then, Robert saw it. The figure's face, briefly illuminated by the strobe of the flickering lights. But it wasn't a face. It was wrong. A distorted, shadowed face. That wasn't human at all, its eyes wide, unblinking, and empty. The scream caught in Robert's throat. The lights flickered out completely. The screen turned to static. And in that instant, the entire mall seemed to come alive, the walls groaning, the air thickening with an unnatural weight. Something was watching him, and it was getting closer. The sudden static on the security screen sent a shock through Robert's entire body. For a moment, everything seemed to stop. The hum of the equipment, the pounding of the rain against the windows, even his own heartbeat. The screen flickered, shifting between black and white static. It was almost as if something was trying to interfere with the footage. Robert squinted, his hand reaching instinctively toward the controls. But before he could adjust the settings, the image cleared, revealing something far worse than he could have imagined. At the far end of the hallway, it was there again. The figure. But this time, it was different. It was no longer just a motionless silhouette. The figure was shifting, jerking violently, its body contorting unnaturally with every flicker of the lights. For a brief, horrifying moment, Robert could swear that the figure's body separated, as though it had multiplied into several twisted, writhing shapes, only to snap back together in a single, grotesque form. The image froze for a split second on the screen, as if the figure was caught between worlds. Robert stumbled back from the monitor, his pulse hammering in his ears. The quiet of the room felt suffocating now. The air, which had once been stale, and still now felt thick, suffused with an energy that set his nerves on edge. His hand trembled as he grabbed for the flashlight and shone it around the small security room. It didn't help. The shadows in the corners seemed to stretch, dark and predatory. "It's just a glitch," Robert thought, but the words were hollow, unconvincing. The sensation that something was wrong, something deeply wrong, gnawed at him, unraveling his sense of reality. The mall had never felt this way before. Not during the odd shift changes, not even during those quiet, eerie late-night patrols. This was different. This felt like the beginning of something far worse. Then came the sound. At first it was barely audible, a faint, unsettling rustling, like fabric brushing against the floor. But it grew louder, unmistakable. Footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, echoing from somewhere down the hallway. Robert froze, straining to listen. The sound was in perfect time with his own heartbeat, rhythmic and slow. Step, pause. And then, in a jarring shift, the steps seemed to fall out of sync, a split second behind his own. "Hello?" Robert's voice cracked as he shouted into the stillness. The footsteps faltered, as if they'd heard him, but the figure didn't stop. It continued to approach, its shadow moving silently across the walls. "Hey!" Robert shouted again, his voice trembling with a mix of frustration and fear. He was almost on the verge of running, but something held him back, something that told him he had to see this through. He turned the knob of the security room door, stepping into the hallway. The lights overhead flickered once more, each burst more erratic than the last. The mall seemed to shudder with each flicker, the atmosphere thickening, like the space was no longer holding together. Robert's flashlight illuminated the hallway, the beam dancing in the oppressive darkness, but it couldn't seem to reach the end where the figure had been standing. His eyes darted nervously around the space. The familiar sights, the empty food court, the closed shops, felt foreign now. The walls seemed to close in, warping and bending as he moved deeper into the corridor. Robert's steps quickened, but the air felt so heavy, so thick, it was as if the mall itself was pushing against him, forcing him to slow down. His flashlight swung wildly as he turned the corner. Nothing. The hallway stretched out before him, empty and still. No figure, no movement. It was as if the creature had simply vanished. But then he heard it again, the footsteps, louder now, just behind him. Robert's heart skipped a beat. He spun around, but no one was there, just the endless corridor stretching out like an infinite void. This can't be happening, Robert thought, his breath ragged. He felt a surge of panic rising in his chest. He couldn't think clearly. The atmosphere was becoming thicker with every passing second. He was trapped, stuck in this never-ending loop of empty hallways and ghostly echoes. He had to get out. He had to leave. But then, just as he turned to run back to the security office, the lights above him flickered once more, and they went out entirely. The whole mall plunged into darkness. A low, bone-chilling sound filled the air, like a gasp or a sigh, too soft for his conscious mind to grasp fully. It was the kind of noise that froze him in place, sending an icy chill crawling across his skin. He reached for his flashlight, but the beam of light was faint and shaking, barely cutting through the darkness. His fingers fumbled with the switch, but it was useless. The mall was now utterly silent, save for the sounds of his rapid, shallow breaths. Then he heard something else. A whisper. It was his own voice, calling from down the hallway. "Robert," the voice whispered, stretching his name in a slow, drawn-out breath. But there was something wrong with it. It wasn't his voice. It was a twisted mockery, faint, yet unmistakably familiar. He turned toward the sound, his heart slamming in his chest, his body trembling with fear. His breath caught as he spotted a figure standing in the distance, the same hooded figure. But now, as the last remaining light from his flashlight flickered in desperation, Robert saw the face. It was not human. The figure's face was contorted, distorted. Its features were hollow, its skin stretched taut over an inhuman skull. The eyes were dark, empty voids that seemed to stare right through him. And worse, it wasn't just standing still. It was walking toward him. Robert stumbled backward, but the figure kept coming, its motion slow and deliberate, like a predator closing in on its prey. The world around him felt like it was warping, the shadows moving, twisting, as though the mall itself were coming alive with the presence of the figure. "Robert, you shouldn't have stayed." The voice was a rasp now, echoing in the silent space. It sounded like his own thoughts, but twisted, unnatural. The figure's hand stretched toward him, its fingers long and unnaturally thin. Robert's heart pounded in his chest, each beat a violent throb in his ears. His feet refused to move. frozen in place by the sheer horror of what he was seeing. The darkness around him felt oppressive, as if the very air was thick with malice. The mall, which had once been a familiar place of routine and order, now felt like a vast, twisted labyrinth closing in on him with every passing second. He stumbled back, his flashlight flickering in his hand, casting erratic shadows that only seemed to deepen the terror. The figure's face, a featureless void of shadows and hollow eyes, was growing closer, and though it moved at a slow, deliberate pace, the air around Robert seemed to freeze, every second stretching out longer than the last. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the figure's face, the unblinking, empty eyes that seemed to stare right through him. It wasn't human, it wasn't anything that should exist in this world. Robert, the voice again. His own voice, twisted and warped, a low whisper that slithered through the stillness. It didn't come from the figure's mouth. No, it came from everywhere. From within the walls, from behind him, from beneath his feet. Robert, I see you. The mall's cold silence pressed in on him, suffocating him as he backed away farther into the darkness. His pulse thundered in his ears, drowning out all other sound. He could feel the mall itself, the walls, the floors, the very air, watching him. The sensation was like something inhuman, an intelligence that was aware of his every movement, a presence that wasn't just observing, but waiting. He couldn't breathe. Where was the exit? Where was his escape? His eyes darted frantically to the hallway behind him. The way he came was now a blur, the distance to the security room seeming impossible, the hallway elongating as if the mall was growing, stretching, to trap him in its endless corridors. Every step he took felt like it brought him further into the labyrinth of terror. His flashlight flickered, sputtering in his hand, as though the very light source was rejecting him. The beam cast one last eerie glow before dying completely, plunging him into darkness. Then he heard it. A sound scraping like nails on metal came from above, followed by a slow, dragging thud. Robert's head jerked upward instinctively, but there was nothing there, except the lights flickered again briefly. When they returned, Robert gasped. The figure, it was standing right in front of him now, its hollow eyes locked onto his, the void within them pulling at Robert's very soul. The figure's face remained hidden under the hood, but the shadow of its gaze was enough to freeze him where he stood. His limbs refused to obey, his body trembling violently. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and a cold chill ran down his spine. Every instinct told him to run, but he was paralyzed. The darkness around him seemed to press tighter with every passing moment, suffocating him in its unseen grasp. The figure's mouth didn't move, but the words came, whispered directly into his mind. You should not have come. You should not have stayed. Robert's chest tightened, a wave of nausea threatening to rise in his throat. It wasn't just a voice. It was a presence, a whisper, not in his ears, but inside his mind, as though the figure had the ability to invade his very thoughts. What is this thing? What does it want with me? He tried to move again, but his feet were rooted to the ground. His body was frozen, unable to tear itself away from the figure that stood before him. The hallway had shrunk into a tunnel, the walls on either side pressing in, suffocating him. He could feel the weight of the figure's gaze on him, cold, unrelenting, but then the figure took a step forward, and Robert, in a blind panic, broke free. With all the force he could muster, Robert turned and ran. His feet thudded against the floor, the sound of his footsteps louder than ever in the suffocating silence. He didn't know where he was going, he didn't care. He just had to get away from the figure, from the presence that had been stalking him, watching him, from the thing that had taken control of the mall itself. He turned a corner, only to find the hallway distorted. It was not the same hallway he had been running through. The walls were stretched, the floor warped in a way that made his stomach lurch. Everything felt like it was moving. The mall was alive, shifting with an unnatural force. He was trapped. But then he saw something, a door, the security office. He rushed toward it, his body trembling with exhaustion and fear. His fingers fumbled for the keys, the sound of them rattling like thunder in his ears. Click. He pushed the door open, slamming it behind him with a force that echoed through the empty space. His heart pounded in his chest, his breath coming in, short, ragged gasps. He had made it back to the security room, but the feeling of safety was fleeting. The room was still, too still. The monitors were dark, their usual feed blank. Robert stared at the screens in horror. There was no sign of the figure, no trace of its movements. It was as if the entire mall had erased it from existence. But then, the lights flickered again, and when they returned, Robert saw something that sent ice through his veins. The figure was standing on the other side of the glass security room door. It was watching him, silent, motionless, its hollow eyes locked onto his, and then the lights went out entirely. The lights in the security room blinked, their flickering shadows casting long, contorted shapes across the walls. Robert stood frozen, his breath coming in shallow gasps as he stared at the door. The figure was there, standing on the other side, its hollow, featureless eyes locked onto his. There was no sound in the room except for the pounding of his own heart, echoing like a drum in his ears. The air was thick, heavy, with an unbearable silence, but it was the flickering lights that gnawed at him the most. Each time they flickered, the shadows grew longer, darker, more alive. His fingers trembled as he reached for the flashlight, but when he turned it on, the beam flickered weakly and died. He tried again, shaking it in his hands, but it remained dark. His only source of light, the only thing that had kept him anchored in this nightmare, was gone. Panic gripped him, squeezing his chest. The security monitors were still black, the screens offering no solace, no answers. He was utterly alone. The presence outside the door was palpable now, pressing in from all sides, as though the figure were not just standing there, but reaching for him. In the darkness, Robert could feel his mind fracturing under the pressure. The mall, once so familiar to him, was now a labyrinth of shifting walls and impossible shadows. The figure had invaded everything, his thoughts, his perceptions, the very air he breathed. There was no escape. There was no rational explanation. Then, the sound came, a slow, dragging sound that echoed from somewhere far down the hall. It was subtle at first, but as the seconds stretched on, it became louder, more deliberate. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Robert's stomach churned, the feeling of dread suffocating him. His instinct screamed at him to run, but his feet refused to move. His body was locked in place, paralyzed by the growing realization that the mall itself had changed. It wasn't just the figure that haunted him now, it was the entire building. It was as if the walls were alive, pulsing with a malevolent energy, closing in around him with every passing second. Then a whisper. Robert. It was his name, but it wasn't his voice. It was soft, ethereal and chilling. It came from behind him, then in front, and finally from all sides. It was the same voice, but it was no longer just a whisper. It was a hiss, a breathless, mocking sound that felt like it was inside his skull. The figure wasn't speaking to him anymore. It was inside him. He stumbled back, his heart racing, and as he did, he caught a glimpse of the door's reflection in the darkened glass of the security room. The figure's form was distorted now, as if it were no longer simply standing outside the room. Its body shimmered, warping with each flicker of the lights. It moved in the reflection, a grotesque version of itself, its limbs stretching unnaturally. Long, its head tilting in an impossible angle. In the reflection, Robert saw its true face, or at least what was left of it. It wasn't human. Its skin was a patchwork of shifting shadows, its eyes two hollow voids that swallowed the light around it. Its features were not defined, just a vague outline of a face that shifted and contorted like it was in constant motion, a reflection of some broken reality. And yet the face stared at him. No, into him, its hollow eyes pulling at his very soul. "You shouldn't have stayed," the voice whispered again, this time from the direction of the reflection. It was closer now, as if the figure was standing right beside him. But when he turned, no one was there. Suddenly, a violent bang from the door snapped him out of his trance. Robert whirled around, panic flooding his system. The door rattled violently, as if something was pounding against it from the outside. The shadows seemed to pulse in time with the pounding, the flickering lights casting long, sharp shadows on the walls. The room felt as if it were caving in on him. Robert's vision swam, his mind racing with thoughts of escape. But where could he go? The mall had turned into an unrecognizable nightmare. Every hallway, every corner leading back to the same place, the same figure, the same eyes. Run, now. Don't look back. It was the only thought that made sense. Robert reached for the door, his hand trembling as he touched the cold metal handle. He pushed against it with all his strength, but it didn't budge. The door was locked, sealed tight. No escape. The pounding intensified. He stepped back, his mind racing for a solution. He had to do something. He had to escape. There had to be a way out. The mall had never felt this alive, this aware. It was no longer just a building. It had become something more, something that was watching him, manipulating his every move. The lights flickered again, this time for longer. Robert's chest tightened as the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. The walls creaked, groaned, as if the mall were shifting, moving. It was alive, it was breathing, and then the door opened. Robert's heart nearly stopped. The figure was standing there again, now in the doorway. It had crossed the threshold without a sound. Its form shimmered, shifting between shapes as if it couldn't decide what it wanted to be. The lights flickered again, and the figure's face appeared, its hollow eyes locking with his. There was no escape, no way out. But as Robert looked closer, something shifted in his mind. The figure wasn't just standing there anymore. It was moving, but not toward him. It was moving toward the back of the security room, where the monitors sat, the mall's control center. The realization hit him like a bolt of lightning. It needs the controls. It needs to control the mall. The mall is feeding on his fear. His legs moved before he could think, his body acting on sheer instinct. He lunged toward the desk, his hand slamming against the control panel as he tried to access the security feed. But the screen was blank. The figure was already here, its influence far too strong. "It's too late," the voice whispered again. "You've already become part of it." The room was spinning, his thoughts scattered like leaves in a storm. He couldn't think, he couldn't escape. And then the lights flickered one last time. Robert's eyes locked on the screen as the lights flickered back to life, casting harsh, staccato flashes of brightness across the security room. His heartbeat was a loud, oppressive thud in his chest as the final image on the screen clicked into place. At first, it seemed like just another security feed. But the moment Robert saw the grainy image, his breath caught in his throat. It was a shot of the empty corridor he had just fled from. The hallway was still, nothing but the hum of distant lights and shadows. But as he focused on it, something caught his eye, a small, barely noticeable movement at the edge of the screen. His reflection. It was a split-second image, as though caught between two frames, but it was unmistakable. Robert, sitting exactly where he was now, in the security room. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end as he watched himself, staring at the screen, exactly as he was. His figure sat motionless, caught in an eerie, silent loop. He could hardly breathe. This is impossible, Robert thought, his hands shaking uncontrollably. I'm right here. But the screen wasn't showing the present. It was showing something else. A recording. A recording of him staring back at himself from an earlier time. No. No, 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 he muttered to himself, his voice a hollow whisper. The realization hit him like a blow to the chest. The figure had been watching him all along. The mall was never just a building. It was alive, and it had already taken him. The more he stared at the screen, the more the image seemed to warp. His reflection on the monitor no longer looked like him. It looked like something else, something distorted and wrong. The face in the footage slowly twisted, its features stretching unnaturally, as if his own reflection was contorting in real time. And then he saw it. In the reflection, his own eyes blinked at him slowly, deliberately. But it wasn't Robert blinking. The figure in the footage wasn't him anymore. It was something else wearing his face, its empty, hollow eyes staring straight back at him. The reflection in the monitor grinned. It was his smile. But it wasn't his smile. Robert's stomach lurched, his body trembling with the realization that what he had thought was his own face, the thing that had mirrored his every movement, wasn't real. It had never been real. He had been a part of the mall's twisted game all along, a puppet caught in its web. The figure in the footage moved its hand slowly to its mouth, as if it was savoring the moment. The reflection grinned wider, its hollow eyes gleaming with malicious joy. You've already become part of this place, the voice whispered from the depths of Robert's mind, a thought shared, his thoughts twisted and contorted, blending with the figures. There's no going back now. His reflection on the monitor blinked again, and then it was gone. The screen went black. Robert recoiled, his heart pounding in his chest. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating. He could no longer hear the hum of the lights or the sound of his own breathing. Everything was drowning in an unnerving silence. And then he heard it. A noise. Low, guttural, like a growl coming from the shadows of the room. Robert. It wasn't the voice from before. It was something deeper, more resonant, like the sound of something ancient, something that had been sleeping beneath the mall's foundation for centuries. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end as the voice grew louder, reverberating through the very walls of the security room. It wasn't just coming from the door anymore, it was everywhere, in the walls, in the floor, in his bones. You belong to us now. Robert's pulse quickened, panic surging through him. He needed to get out. There had to be a way out. He reached for the door again, but it wouldn't budge. The handle was cold under his trembling fingers, locked from the other side. Desperation clawed at his throat as he yanked on it, but it wouldn't open. The figure, the thing that had been haunting him, was closing in. He could feel it. It wasn't just in the hallway anymore. It had breached the very fabric of the mall. He wasn't just trapped physically. He was trapped in the mall's twisted, warped version of reality. The lights flickered one last time, and when they returned, the security monitors sprang to life once more. But this time, there was no reflection of Robert on the screen, no trace of his image anywhere. Instead, there was a new feed, another hallway, another part of the mall. But it wasn't empty. The figure was there, and it was moving toward the camera. Robert's breath caught in his throat. He tried to back away from the monitors, but his feet were rooted to the floor, as if the mall was physically holding him in place. The figure's face slowly appeared in the corner of the screen, moving closer, its body shifting like a shadow. Its eyes gleamed with that same hollow, empty void. And as it approached the camera, Robert's mind screamed in terror. It knows. It knows I'm here. It always knew. The figure's hand reached out, its fingers elongating, stretching toward the lens. Robert could feel the space between them collapse, the figure's presence overwhelming his senses. And then, the figure's hand passed through the lens of the monitor, its fingers pushing through the glass like it was made of smoke. "You're not escaping, Robert." The blackness enveloped him. Robert's body felt weightless, as if his soul had been ripped out of his physical form. He tried to scream, but no sound came. His mind was racing, frantic, yet everything around him felt wrong. The feeling of being suffocated by the void was overwhelming. The chill in the air wrapped around him like icy chains, and his skin prickled as if it were being touched by something cold, unseen. He opened his eyes, or thought he did, and everything was distorted. The familiar walls of the security room were gone. There was no floor beneath him, no ceiling above. He was floating in an endless void, a liminal space where time didn't exist, where reality fractured like shards of glass. It was as if he had slipped between the cracks of the mall's twisted version of existence. The figure's voice echoed in his mind, filling the empty space. "You never left, Robert. You've always been here." The words felt like they were tearing into his mind, like the figure was pulling him apart piece by piece. His thoughts scrambled, but they were so fragmented, so disconnected, that he couldn't form a single coherent idea. He couldn't grasp what was happening. How had he gotten here? Why was he here? He reached out, his hands trembling, but there was nothing to hold on to. No ground, no walls, no light, just the suffocating emptiness. And then he saw it. A flicker, the lights, the flickering lights. In the distance, just beyond the black abyss, the fluorescent lights of the mall were visible again. But they weren't the same. They buzzed and flickered erratically, casting long, unnatural shadows that twisted like living things. The walls of the mall were there too, but they were warped, distorting like they were made of liquid, undulating as if alive. A figure moved within the shadows. It was the thing again. But this time it wasn't just standing there. It was closer. Closer than ever. Its body seemed to pulse in and out of existence, a fractured version of reality itself, flickering in and out like the lights above. Robert's heart raced in his chest, his throat constricting with terror. His body wanted to move, to run, but there was nowhere to go. The figure was coming for him, its dark, empty eyes staring at him through the flickering shadows. It wasn't just a person. It was something ancient, something that had been lying, dormant in the mall, waiting, feeding off the fear of anyone foolish enough to enter. This place is mine," the figure said, its voice cold, a mixture of Robert's own thoughts and something darker, something far older. "It will never let you leave. You belong to it now." His mind screamed, but his voice wouldn't work. He was trapped, suspended in the endless blackness. And then, the lights flickered again, and for the first time, Robert felt something shift. The mall, the hallways, the very walls began to move, like the place was alive, its massive, oppressive shape folding around him. The figure reached out, its hand now solid, emerging from the shadows with terrible clarity. It was stretching toward him, its fingers like claws, elongating as it advanced. "No one ever leaves," the figure hissed, the words seeping into Robert's mind like poison. "You should have known. You belong to me." The air felt so thick, so heavy, as if Robert was being pulled into the very walls of the mall itself. His body jerked forward involuntarily. He wanted to scream, to run, to break free. But his limbs wouldn't obey. He was trapped in the mall's grip, bound by something older, something that had always been there, waiting for its next victim. But then, he saw something he hadn't noticed before. The floor beneath him wasn't just empty space. It was covered with something. Blood. It was pooling at his feet, dark and slick, filling the void with an unnerving, slow spread. Robert stumbled back, his heart racing, panic swelling in his chest. The blood wasn't just beneath him, it was moving. The mole was alive. The blood was alive. He felt the walls closing in, the mole's monstrous shape tightening around him. He couldn't breathe. He was suffocating. "You are already gone," the figure whispered again, its form now almost fully visible. It was no longer just an outline of shadows. It was a grotesque thing, a reflection of every fear Robert had ever felt, its body shifting between shapes. It was everything and nothing. The figure's eyes gleamed with an inhuman hunger. "You've always been here. You've never left. You will never leave." In that moment, something inside Robert broke. The overwhelming realization slammed into him like a freight train. This place, this mall, wasn't just haunted. It was a prison, and he had been locked in it from the moment he set foot inside. There was no escape, no way to break free. The mall had claimed him, twisted his reality, turned him into one of its lost souls. The figure reached for him once more, its clawed hand moving closer, and Robert, despite everything, did the only thing he could think to do. He reached back, his hand stretched forward, touching the figure's cold, shadowed skin, and the moment his fingers made contact, the world around him shattered. The mall around him imploded, the walls crumbling into darkness. The blood, the walls, the lights, all collapsed in on themselves, and then silence. Robert blinked, his eyes adjusting to the sudden brightness of the fluorescent lights overhead. For a moment, he was disoriented, as if waking from a bad dream. But the nagging sense of unease crept back into his chest as he took in his surroundings. "See you are mall." It looked normal. He stood in the center of the main hallway, surrounded by the familiar storefronts, the echoes of distant chatter and soft music playing over the speakers. It was as though the nightmare, the shadows, the figure, the suffocating darkness had never happened. But something was wrong. The air felt too warm, too thick with the hum of life around him. People walked past him, oblivious to his presence, laughing, chatting, carrying bags filled with purchases. They seemed like ordinary mall-goers, but Robert could feel the weight of their footsteps, the disjointedness of their movements, as if they were just parts of the illusion. No one looked at him, no one seemed to notice him. He reached out, his fingers brushing the edge of a nearby store's glass door. It was cold to the touch, solid, real, too real. What is this place? His mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening. He had been in the void. The figure, the blood, the destruction. It had all collapsed, yet now he was standing here, in this seemingly normal mall. It wasn't just a hallucination, was it? Was he still trapped in some form of a dream? Some perverse reflection of reality? Or had the mall, this thing, truly consumed him? "Robert," the voice again. His heart stopped and his breath hitched. It was faint at first, but unmistakable coming from behind him. He spun around, his pulse quickening. The figure stood in the distance, but this time it was different. It wasn't looming in the shadows or warping in and out of reality. It was standing fully visible in the middle of the food court just a few yards away. Its figure shimmered with an unnatural presence, its face hidden beneath the hood. But now, the figure moved toward him, its body shifting with every step, like the broken pieces of a distorted puzzle coming together. Robert's breath caught in his throat. This time, the figure's movements were not disjointed. It walked with purpose, each step heavy, deliberate. Its hollow eyes glowed faintly beneath the hood, and though Robert couldn't see the face clearly, he could feel the weight of its gaze on him, like a predator locking onto its prey. "You don't belong here." The voice echoed in his mind. Again, but this time, it was deeper, more sinister, as though the figure were inside him, twisting his thoughts. Robert backed away instinctively, the crowd around him oblivious to the danger. He felt himself bump into a passerby, the woman looking right through him as if he were invisible. It hit him like a punch to the stomach. He was no longer part of this reality. The mall was no longer a place in the world. It had become his prison, his tomb. And the figure, it was the warden. "You've been here before." The figure's voice twisted, as if reading his thoughts. "You've always been here." Robert's mind spun, the weight of the words crashing over him. What did it mean? What did the figure want from him? A terrible thought crept into his mind. Had he really ever left? "This is where you belong." The voice whispered louder now, and Robert felt it, an overwhelming pull toward the figure. His body jerked involuntarily, his feet dragging him closer to the creature, his legs unable to resist the tug. Every step he took was a step further away from his sanity, further into the unrelenting grip of the mall's dark power. "No," Robert gasped, struggling to break free of its hold. He tried to stop to turn around, but his body betrayed him. The figure was in control now. "You can't escape," the figure hissed, and as it spoke, Robert saw the truth, what had been hidden beneath the mask, beneath the illusion. The figure's face was no longer shrouded by the hood. It was his face, but it was distorted, contorted like an image torn in half and stitched back together. His own eyes, hollow and empty, stared back at him, not with recognition, but with an eerie, twisted hunger. "This is what I've become." A shock of realization slammed into Robert's chest. He had never truly left the mall. Not when he had thought he escaped. Not when he had fought to break free. The mall had consumed him. The figure wasn't just an entity. It was him. It was a reflection of his own fear, his own broken mind. The crowd around him suddenly stopped, all of them frozen in place, their faces blank and expressionless, their eyes empty. They turned to face him, but their gazes were devoid of life. They weren't real. They were just shadows, ghosts of the mall's twisted reality. The figure raised its hand, pointing a long, gnarled finger at Robert. "You are part of this place now, Robert. You always have been, and you always will be." Robert's chest tightened as the crushing weight of the mall's presence closed in on him. The walls shifted around him, as if the building itself were tightening, constricting his every breath. The lights overhead began to flicker wildly, the lights growing dimmer and dimmer until it was all but dark. In that suffocating darkness, Robert's mind finally snapped. He'd spent so long fighting, so long trying to escape. But there was no escape. There was no way out. And in the endless void of the mall, he belonged. The darkness was absolute. Robert's body felt as though it was dissolving into the blackness, his limbs numb, his mind slowly losing its grip on reality. The last thing he remembered was the figure's outstretched hand, its fingers stretching impossibly long toward him, its hollow eyes gleaming with something ancient, something monstrous, and then nothing. Time itself felt as though it had ceased to exist. There was no light, no sound, no breath, no movement. Just an endless void, a suffocating silence, and the weight of something terrible pressing against him. But amidst the crushing void, Robert felt a strange, cold clarity. His mind, now free from the physical confines of the mall, seemed to reach out into the darkness seeking answers. But then, a flash. The lights flickered. He was back. The mall. It was as if time had reset, as if he had never left, never been trapped in that endless void. He stood in the center of the hallway again, surrounded by the flickering lights, the empty stores, and the echoes of footsteps from somewhere in the distance. The mall was eerily silent, save for the soft rustling of papers and the low hum of fluorescent lights. The difference now was that everything felt wrong. The walls warped. The very structure of the mall seemed unstable, as though reality itself had been cracked open and the truth was seeping through the fractures. The air felt thicker now, colder, and every step Robert took sent tremors through the ground, as if the mall itself were quaking in response to his presence. And then he heard it, a voice, cold and distant. "Welcome home, Robert." The figure appeared before him once more, stepping out from the darkness like a shadow given form. Its body shimmered, its form distorted and in constant flux, never fully solid. But it was still there, waiting. Robert's heart slammed against his chest. He wanted to run, wanted to escape, but his body refused to obey. It was as though the mall had control over him now, as if it were his place, his eternal prison. The figure tilted its head, its face still shrouded by the hood. But Robert could see it now, in fragments. His face, his own face, twisted and broken, like a mirror that had shattered and been pieced back together with the wrong pieces. The eyes gleamed with an inhuman hunger, and for the first time, Robert could feel it, the connection. The figure wasn't just some supernatural being. It was a reflection of him, of his fears, his regrets, his brokenness. "You can't escape what you are," the figure whispered, its voice a twisted mockery of Robert's own. "This mall, this place, is you. It always has been." Robert's breath hitched, his thoughts spinning. He had thought he was fighting against the mall, against the entity that had haunted him, but it wasn't a fight. It had never been. The figure was a reflection of his own mind, his own soul. The mall, the walls, the shadows, they were a manifestation of himself. The figure raised a hand toward him, its fingers stretching like dark tendrils, curling around Robert's chest. He felt an unbearable pressure, as though the very essence of his being was being pulled apart. "You belong to me now," the figure hissed. "You've always belonged to me." Robert struggled, his body fighting against the pull of the figure's grip. He clawed at the air, trying to push it away, but his hands passed through it as if it were made of smoke. The mall around him seemed to be alive, closing in on him, with every passing second. The walls seemed to breathe, shifting and warping, its monstrous presence overwhelming him. The floors cracked beneath his feet, and the very air vibrated with the force of the mall's hunger. Then, in a single, sharp movement, Robert's mind snapped. The reality around him shattered, the world fractured into pieces, distorted, broken, fragments of time and space. Robert's body felt torn in two, as though he was being ripped from the world he'd once known. And then, everything went still. The mall was silent again. The world felt like it had frozen in place, and Robert felt weightless, suspended in the stillness. He looked around, but there was no sign of the figure. No walls, no stores, no flickering lights. There was nothing, only an endless void that stretched on forever. But then, a soft sound, a whisper. "No one ever leaves." It was his voice, but it wasn't his voice. It was the voice of the mall itself. The thing that had consumed him, twisted his reality, and turned him into part of its dark, unending existence. Robert felt the weight of the truth in that whisper. He hadn't been trapped in a building. He had been trapped in his own mind, his own fears, his own regrets. The mall wasn't just a place. It was a manifestation of his deepest, darkest thoughts, a reflection of his own brokenness that had come alive. And now there was no escape. The lights flickered again, and Robert stood frozen in place, unable to move. He was trapped. Trapped in the moment, in the place where time had no meaning. The mall, the figure, it was all a reflection of his own soul, and there was no way out. He had become part of it, just as it had always been a part of him. As the last flicker of light dimmed, Robert knew this was his fate. The mall had claimed him, and in return, he had become one with it, lost forever in the never-ending loop of fear, darkness, and distorted reality. The last thing he heard before everything went black was the voice of the figure, now fully formed, echoing through the void. "You will never leave."